The glow of my phone screen illuminated the darkness of my bedroom at 1 in the morning. Through the infrared camera feed, I watched my mother-in-law creep across my thick carpet, her eyes fixed on my vanity drawer. She thought I was fast asleep. She thought she was about to secure the keys to a safe containing my $8 million inheritance. But when she turned that lock, she triggered a trap that would completely destroy her carefully crafted life. My name is Sydney, 33 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant in Seattle. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with a toxic mother-in-law who thought she could walk all over you and your boundaries. Growing up, I learned early on to trust hard numbers over soft words. As a forensic accountant, my entire career is built on tracking hidden assets, uncovering financial fraud, and catching people in their own lies. My husband Trent and his mother Barbara, however, clearly underestimated my professional skills. They thought, because I was quiet at family dinners, I was oblivious to their scheming. They assumed my long hours at the firm meant I was too exhausted to notice the discrepancies happening under my own roof. Our upscale suburban home in Seattle, with its sweeping views of the water and pristine landscaping, was supposed to be a sanctuary. Instead, it had become a crime scene, and I was the lead investigator. The digital clock on my nightstand shifted to 1 in the morning. Outside, the relentless Seattle rain tapped softly against the heavy glass windows. Beside me, my husband Trent was snoring softly, playing the role of the blissfully ignorant partner. Or so he wanted me to believe. I lay completely still under the heavy down comforter, controlling my breathing to mimic a deep, untroubled sleep. My fingers were wrapped tightly around my smartphone, the screen brightness turned all the way down to a faint glow. On that screen was a live feed from a hidden infrared camera I had installed inside my walk-in closet earlier that week. The heavy oak door of our master bedroom creaked open just a fraction of an inch. A sliver of pale yellow light from the hallway spilled across the dark hardwood floor. Through my slightly parted eyelashes, I watched a shadow slip inside. It was Barbara. She was wearing her expensive silk nightgown, the one she always bragged about buying during a luxury trip to Paris. I had recently discovered that the famous Paris trip was actually funded by maxing out 3 different credit cards she had secretly opened using a slightly altered version of her own name. She tiptoed past the foot of our bed, pausing for a long, calculating moment. Her eyes darted toward my sleeping form to ensure I had not stirred. The sheer audacity of this woman was staggering. For months, I had noticed small things going missing around the house. A $50 bill from my purse here, a piece of vintage jewelry there. Whenever I brought it up, Trent would gaslight me, claiming I was just stressed from my demanding job or misplacing things due to exhaustion. He told me I was becoming paranoid. But numbers do not lie, and neither do hidden cameras. Tonight, however, Barbara was not looking for petty cash to fund her secret shopping addictions. She was after the Holy Grail. 2 weeks ago, my beloved Uncle Harrison had passed away. He was a brilliant investor who had practically raised me when my own parents were struggling. He had recognized my aptitude for math and encouraged me to pursue my accounting degree. In his final days, he had left his entire $8 million trust fund in my name. The original legal documents, along with the master keys to my private bank vaults, were locked in a heavy steel safe down in our basement. But the spare key to that basement safe was temporarily hidden in a small velvet box inside my vanity drawer. At least that is what I had deliberately let Trent overhear me saying on the phone to my lawyer yesterday afternoon. I knew Trent would run straight to his mother with the information. As a forensic accountant, I am trained to set traps for corporate embezzlers. Doing it in my own home was just a change of venue, and honestly, it was much more satisfying. I watched the camera feed on my phone as Barbara slowly slid open the top drawer of my custom vanity. Her manicured fingers were shaking slightly with greedy anticipation as she reached for the ornate wooden box I had placed right at the front. She probably imagined herself gaining control of those $8 million finally paying off the massive underground gambling debts she had been racking up for years and maintaining her facade of upper-crust suburban wealth to her bridge club friends. She lifted the box out of the drawer. It had a small, satisfyingly heavy brass lock on the front. I had spent 3 meticulous hours modifying that specific box. Inside, there were no keys to any safe. Instead, there was a highly pressurized spring-loaded mechanism packed with a quarter-pound of ultra-fine industrial-grade glitter. But I did not stop at glitter. I had mixed the sparkling powder generously with a specialized ultraviolet tracking ink. It is the exact kind of compound that high-security banks use to mark stolen bills during a robbery. It is completely invisible under normal light, incredibly difficult to wash off, and glows a brilliant, undeniable neon blue under a black light. It takes at least 48 hours and a lot of harsh chemical scrubbing to even begin to fade from human skin. On my screen, I watched Barbara fumble with a small metal hairpin trying to pick the delicate brass lock. She twisted her wrist, forcing the mechanism. The lock clicked. The lid sprang open with the explosive force of a mousetrap. A loud pop echoed through the silent closet. A massive cloud of fine, sparkling dust erupted directly upward, blasting Barbara squarely in the face. The force of the glitter bomb knocked her backward. She stumbled blindly into a row of my winter coats, coughing and sputtering violently as the fine powder filled her lungs. A shrill, panicked shriek ripped from her throat, shattering the quiet of the night. The glittering dust rained down, covering her perfect hair, coating her eyelashes, and settling deep into the expensive fibers of her silk nightgown. She frantically clawed at her face, trying to wipe away the gritty powder, completely unaware that she was simultaneously smearing invisible permanent tracking ink all over her skin and clothes. The scream was loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. Beside me, Trent jerked awake, tangled in the bedsheets, completely oblivious to the fact that his mother had just triggered the first phase of my absolute destruction of their lives. "What the hell is going on here?" Trent roared, his voice bouncing off the vaulted ceilings of our master bedroom. He scrambled out of the bed, his feet tangling in the heavy duvet, and slammed his palm against the wall switch. The sudden blinding glare of the recessed lighting illuminated the absolute disaster unfolding inside my custom walk-in closet. Barbara was huddled on the hardwood floor, clutching her chest as if she were experiencing a massive cardiac event. Fine silver and gold glitter coated her expensive silk nightgown, her perfectly dyed hair, and her trembling hands. She coughed violently, producing a thick cloud of sparkling dust with every exaggerated wheeze. Did Trent look at me to see if I was safe? Did he ask if an intruder had broken into our home? Absolutely not. He rushed straight past my side of the bed, dropping to his knees beside his mother. "Mom, are you okay? What happened?" Trent panicked desperately, trying to brush the sparkling powder off her trembling shoulders. Barbara pointed a glitter-covered finger directly at me. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated agony. "She tried to blind me, Trent. Your wife set a vicious trap for me in the dark. I could have had a heart attack." Trent whipped his head around to face me. His face was flushed crimson with rage, the veins in his neck bulging prominently. "Are you completely out of your mind, Sydney? You booby-trapped our own house. You are abusing an elderly woman. What is wrong with you?" I sat up slowly, pushing the thick down comforter aside. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. Forensic accountants do not deal in hysterics or emotional outbursts. We deal in hard, undeniable evidence. An elderly woman who happens to be sneaking around my private vanity at 1 a.m, I stated calmly, crossing my arms over my chest. "Care to explain that highly unusual behavior, Barbara?" Right on cue, Barbara launched into her meticulously rehearsed victim routine. She forced out fake tears, her voice quivering with practiced fragility. "I had a terrible migraine, Trent. My head was pounding so intensely I could barely see straight. I did not want to wake you both up. I just came in here looking for the extra-strength painkillers Sydney keeps in her bottom drawer. And she attacked me like a wild animal. She was looking for medicine, you absolute psycho." Trent yelled, standing up and aggressively marching toward the edge of my bed. "She is a guest in our home, and you treat her like a common street criminal. You are deeply sick. You need serious psychiatric help. I looked at Trent, analyzing the man I had married 5 years ago. This was the man who had promised to protect me. Yet here he was, aggressively defending a woman who was actively trying to rob me blind in the middle of the night. Medicine, I repeated, letting the word hang heavily in the tense air. That is a fascinating defense. Let us test that theory right now. I reached into my bedside nightstand and pulled out a heavy tactical-grade ultraviolet flashlight. It was a specialized tool I frequently used during corporate field audits to detect forged watermarks on classified financial documents. I stepped out of bed, walked calmly over to the wall switch, and plunged the bedroom back into pitch-black darkness. Turn the lights back on, Sydney. Stop playing these twisted games. Trent demanded, his angry voice echoing in the dark room. Instead of answering him, I pressed the power button on the heavy metal flashlight. A focused beam of intense neon purple light cut sharply through the blackness, hitting Barbara directly on the closet floor. The visual effect was immediate and horrifyingly beautiful. The specialized tracking ink I had mixed into the glitter illuminated like a radioactive beacon. Barbara's face, her hands, and the entire front of her silk nightgown glowed a brilliant, undeniable neon blue. But that was not the most damning part of the physical evidence. I moved the UV beam lower, sweeping it deliberately across the hardwood floor where Barbara had been kneeling. When the explosive trap detonated, the sudden shock had caused her to drop something from the deep pocket of her robe. I focused the purple light strictly on the scattered objects near her feet. There, glowing just as brightly as the chemical ink on her face, were several crisp $100 bills. "What is that?" Trent asked, his righteous anger faltering for a fraction of a second as he stared blankly at the glowing currency scattered across the floorboards. "That, Trent, is the bait," I explained, keeping the harsh light perfectly steady. "For the past 3 months, hundreds of dollars have been mysteriously vanishing from my personal wallet. You told me I was just stressed. You told me I was misplacing cash because I worked too many hours at the firm. You actively gaslighted me into thinking I was losing my mind." I took a slow, calculated step closer to his mother. She was frozen in the UV light, looking exactly like a neon deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck. So I started marking my cash with the exact same invisible security ink I packed into that glitter bomb. I continued, my voice ringing coldly in the dark room. "Those bills glowing on the floor right now, they were sitting securely in my purse yesterday afternoon. Did you need $100 bills to cure your migraine, Barbara? Or were you planning to use my hard-earned cash to pay off another secret underground poker debt at the casino?" Barbara let out a dramatic gasp, pulling her glowing hands tightly to her chest. "Trent, she is framing me. She planted that money there to make me look bad. I have never stolen a single dime in my entire life." The evidence was literal glowing proof of her chronic theft. A normal husband would have been horrified. A rational man would have immediately demanded answers from his mother. But Trent was neither normal nor rational. He was a textbook enabler, entirely dependent on his mother's approval and deeply resentful of my financial success. Trent stomped over to the wall and slammed the light switch back on, blinding us all temporarily. He stepped aggressively between me and Barbara, puffing out his chest to physically intimidate me. "You are framing my mother over a few petty dollars." Trent sneered, completely ignoring the undeniable fact that she had just been caught red-handed. "You are so obsessed with your money that you treat your own family like criminal suspects. You have lost your mind, Sydney. You are a cold, calculating, paranoid woman." "I am a forensic accountant," I corrected him sharply, refusing to back down. "I do not guess. I prove. And I just proved your mother is a thief." Trent's face twisted into an ugly, cruel mask. It was the mask of a desperate man who realized he could not win the argument with logic, so he decided to leverage brute force and emotional blackmail. "I do not care about your stupid invisible ink," he barked, stepping so close I could feel the heat radiating from his angry face. "My mother is the victim here. You assaulted her in our home. You are going to get down on your knees right now and apologize to her." I stared right through him. "I will absolutely never apologize to a thief." Trent let out a harsh, barking laugh that contained zero warmth. He pointed a rigid finger directly at my face, delivering his ultimate rehearsed threat. You listen to me, Sydney. You apologize to my mother right now, or I am walking out that door. I will file for divorce tomorrow morning. And since we live in a community property state, I will take half of everything. Half of this luxury house, half of your massive bank accounts, and half of that shiny $8 million trust fund your uncle just left you. You will be completely ruined. He stood there looking incredibly smug, fully believing he held all the winning cards. He thought the heavy threat of losing my substantial wealth would terrify me into absolute submission. He thought his basic, deeply flawed understanding of marital law would force me to beg for his unearned forgiveness. What Trent did not know, and what he was about to learn the hard way, is that legal inheritance is strictly classified as separate property. Unless it is commingled with joint marital assets, a greedy spouse cannot legally touch a single cent of it. And as an expert in financial fraud, I had kept every penny of my uncle's money locked behind ironclad, impenetrable legal barriers. But I did not tell him that yet. A master investigator never reveals her entire hand until the trap is fully sprung. I just looked at my husband, absorbing the absolute betrayal shining in his eyes, and began silently calculating my next devastating move. The digital clock on my kitchen wall glowed a stark neon green. It was exactly 6 in the morning. I had not slept a single minute since the explosive confrontation in my master bedroom. Instead of tossing and turning in a state of emotional distress, I had spent the remaining hours of the night in my home office. I secured my digital assets, locked down my personal credit profiles, and transferred my most sensitive client files to an encrypted offline server. Forensic accountants do not waste time crying when they detect a localized financial threat. We build impenetrable firewalls. Downstairs, the theatrical performance of a lifetime was already in full swing. I could hear the shrill, frantic pitch of my mother-in-law echoing up the wooden staircase. Barbara was pacing the length of our open-concept living room, treating the early morning hours like her own personal stage. She had purposely kept her glowing glitter-covered silk nightgown on to maximize the dramatic visual effect for anyone who might walk through the front door. Right now, she held her smartphone tightly to her ear, ensuring her voice was amplified loud enough to penetrate the walls of my house. She was making her morning rounds, calling every single relative in Trent's extended family to spin her twisted narrative. You have no idea the absolute nightmare we are living in right now. Barbara wailed into the receiver, her voice trembling with highly manufactured terror. I am trapped in a house with a mad woman. Sydney has completely lost her mind. She is violently schizophrenic. She planted a chemical explosive in the bedroom to permanently blind me. I am a frail, elderly woman, and my own daughter-in-law is subjecting me to severe, calculated domestic abuse. Trent is terrified for his own life. We do not know what she might do next. I stood at the top of the staircase, calmly buttoning the cuffs of my tailored charcoal blazer. I listened as she spun a web of utter malicious fiction. She was not just complaining about a family argument. She was systematically assassinating my character, laying the precise groundwork for a much larger, more sinister legal maneuver. Claiming I was suddenly schizophrenic and prone to unprovoked violence was a heavily calculated legal strategy. She was trying to establish a documented public history of extreme mental instability. I knew exactly why she was doing this. If they could successfully paint me as a mentally incompetent danger to myself and others, Trent could easily petition a judge for emergency control over my finances. That included gaining direct access to my $8 million trust fund. It was a classic desperate asset grab. I walked slowly down the carpeted stairs, my expression entirely blank. Trent was sitting at the kitchen island nursing a mug of black coffee. He watched his mother pace the floor, nodding along in solemn agreement with her fabricated trauma. He did not look at me with the anger or confusion of a betrayed husband. He looked at me with the cold, calculating eyes of an opportunist who had just found a highly convenient excuse to seize control of my wealth. The man I had married was actively, willingly participating in a vicious smear campaign to label me clinically insane. I ignored his hostile glare. I walked right past the kitchen island, the heels of my pumps clicking sharply and rhythmically against the expensive hardwood floor. I did not raise my voice to defend myself against the outrageous accusations. I did not grab the phone from Barbara's trembling hand to scream my innocence to whichever gullible aunt or uncle was on the other end of the line. Engaging in a screaming match with a narcissist is a profound waste of billable hours. It also gives them exactly what they want. They wanted me to yell. They wanted me to look erratic and unhinged so they could record it as proof of my supposed mental breakdown. Instead, I calmly walked to the entryway table and retrieved my heavy leather briefcase. Seeing my complete lack of emotional response only infuriated Barbara further. She desperately needed a chaotic reaction to validate her aggressive victimhood. She gripped her phone tighter and raised her voice even louder, making absolutely sure the person on the line caught every single word of her distress. She is standing right here looking at me like a total psychopath. Barbara sobbed into the microphone, forcing out a dramatic, ragged breath. She is completely detached from reality. She has no remorse for trying to physically maim me. I think she needs to be institutionalized immediately for her own safety and ours. We are looking into an involuntary psychiatric hold today before she kills someone. I zipped my briefcase shut with a loud, definitive snap. I turned around, slowly fixing my gaze entirely on Barbara. I let the heavy, uncomfortable silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds. I wanted the relative on the phone to hear exactly what I was about to say. I wanted Trent to hear it. I wanted the words to burn into their memories. "You are putting on a truly spectacular performance this morning, Barbara," I stated, my voice echoing with icy, unwavering precision across the vaulted living room. The fake tears, the trembling voice, the desperate pleas for family sympathy. It is almost flawless execution. But I really have to ask. The last time you managed to cry this convincingly was when you tricked Trent's father into signing over the deed to the family house right before his heart gave out, was it not? The effect of my words was instantaneous and absolute. Barbara froze dead in her tracks. The fake theatrical sobbing stopped as if a master switch had been flipped in her brain. Her mouth hung open in a silent, horrified gasp. The smartphone slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp plastic clatter. The relative on the other end of the line was completely forgotten. Trent dropped his ceramic coffee mug. Dark hot liquid splashed violently across the white marble countertop and dripped onto the floor, but he did not even blink. He stared at me, his face suddenly drained of all color. He had always firmly believed the sanitized, tragic narrative his mother had fed him about his father's sudden death and the mysterious rapid transfer of the family real estate. He had absolutely no idea that I had spent my free weekends pulling the public county property records, analyzing the highly suspicious notary signatures, and uncovering the exact timeline of the fraudulent transfer that had left his father utterly penniless in his final days. I did not wait for a response from either of them. I did not need to. The total suffocating paralysis in the room was all the confirmation I required. I adjusted the leather strap of my briefcase on my shoulder, opened my heavy oak front door, and stepped out into the crisp, cool Seattle morning. "I have a highly profitable forensic accounting firm to run," I said over my shoulder, not bothering to look back at the shattered silence I had just created in my wake. "Feel free to keep talking to your relatives, Barbara. But remember, an auditor always finds the paper trail." I pulled my car into the reserved underground parking spot at my firm. The thick concrete walls and harsh fluorescent lights of the financial district offered a stark, comforting contrast to the theatrical circus I had just left behind. I took the elevator to the 12th floor, swiped my secure keycard, and walked straight past the reception desk. I locked the heavy glass door of my private office. This was my sanctuary. Here, manufactured emotions held zero power. Numbers dictated the absolute truth. I set my leather briefcase on the massive mahogany desk and booted up my workstation. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. It was time to conduct a hostile audit on my own marriage. Usually I handled the high-level investments and my uncle's massive trust fund while Trent managed our day-to-day household checking and joint credit accounts. I had trusted him implicitly with the mundane bills. That was my first and only critical mistake. I logged into our primary banking portal using my master credentials. To an untrained layman, the monthly statements would look perfectly normal. Grocery runs, utility bills, gas station fill-ups, and occasional dinner dates. But I do not read bank statements like a layman. I read them like an apex predator hunting for a hidden pulse. I immediately spotted the financial bleeding. It started with the cash withdrawals, small, seemingly insignificant amounts pulled from various ATMs located just outside our immediate zip code. $200 on a Tuesday, $400 on a Thursday. These were the petty thefts that had prompted me to use the ultraviolet tracking ink in the first place. But those small missing bills were merely the smoke. I was looking for the roaring fire. I shifted my focused attention to our joint lines of credit and the high-limit credit cards I rarely monitored because they were strictly reserved for domestic emergencies. My eyes scanned the endless columns of digital ledgers. My heart rate remained entirely steady, driven by pure analytical focus. Trent had gotten incredibly arrogant. He had initiated a complex series of balance transfers over the past 90 days. He systematically moved funds from our joint savings into a secondary unlisted checking account he had quietly opened under a slight variation of his legal name. From there, the money was wired out in strictly structured increments. He deliberately kept every single wire transfer just under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold to avoid triggering an automatic investigation flag from the banking authorities. It is a classic desperate money laundering technique known in my industry as smurfing. It is also incredibly amateurish if you know exactly where and how to look. I fired up a specialized financial tracking software we use at the firm for massive corporate embezzlement cases. I inputted the routing numbers from Trent's hidden wire transfers. The digital breadcrumbs led far away from Seattle. They bypassed normal retail vendors entirely. The money was being funneled through a shady third-party payment processor registered in the state of Nevada. I rapidly typed a few lines of code to pierce the corporate veil of the processor, pulling the public registry data. The final destination illuminated on my high-definition screen, bright and undeniable. Las Vegas. The funds were not going to a standard retail bank. They were landing directly in the holding accounts of a high-risk debt collection agency heavily affiliated with 3 major casino resorts on the Las Vegas Strip. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, pressing my fingertips together as the puzzle pieces locked into place with sickening clarity. Barbara did not just have a taste for luxury silk nightgowns or expensive designer handbags. She had a crippling, insatiable gambling addiction. And Trent was not just passively covering for her bad habits. He was actively, systematically embezzling his own wife's hard-earned wealth to keep his mother's aggressive casino bookies at bay. I cross-referenced the exact dates of the wire transfers with Barbara's supposed weekend spa retreats. Every single time she claimed to be relaxing at an exclusive wellness resort in Napa Valley, Trent was frantically wiring massive amounts of cash to Nevada to cover her losses. The sheer audacity of their coordinated long-term lies was breathtaking. I ran a comprehensive reconciliation of the past 6 months. The total amount Trent had covertly siphoned from our joint assets made my blood run ice cold. It was not just a few $1,000s missing. He had drained exactly $75,000 in liquid cash to feed Barbara's escalating casino debts. He had been stealing my salary to subsidize the frantic, destructive lifestyle of a woman who openly despised me. He watched me work grueling 60-hour weeks auditing fraudulent companies for my clients, only to come home and quietly funnel my paycheck straight to the blackjack tables. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train, the fake migraine, the midnight trespassing, the glitter bomb. Barbara was not looking for loose cash in my vanity to buy a new pair of shoes. She had already burned through the entire $75,000 Trent had stolen for her. The casinos were likely threatening her again. She was totally desperate. She knew about my uncle's $8 million trust fund. She wanted the keys to my safe because she fully intended to clear out my inheritance to wipe her gambling slate clean. And Trent was fully prepared to let her do it. He had aggressively demanded I apologize to her this morning, knowing exactly what she was trying to steal from me in the dark. I did not cry. I did not scream in frustration. I simply hit print. The heavy-duty laser printer in the corner of my office hummed to life, spitting out page after page of undeniable, legally binding proof of wire fraud and domestic embezzlement. I gathered the warm sheets of paper and arranged them into a pristine, structured file. Trent thought he could outsmart a forensic accountant by moving money in the shadows. He was about to find out that I absolutely own the shadows. The heavy-duty laser printer in the corner of my private office was still humming, spitting out the final pages of Trent's wire fraud evidence when my secure desk line began to ring. It was not my standard business line. It was the encrypted direct number I exclusively provided to my top-tier financial contacts and primary banking institutions. I picked up the receiver, fully expecting a frantic client requesting an emergency corporate audit. Instead, I heard the cheerful, overly polished voice of David, a senior loan director at Pacific Northwest Fidelity. That was the specific bank holding the original deed to my personal real estate. David sounded completely relaxed, completely unaware that he was about to drop a financial nuclear bomb directly onto my life. He stated he was calling to provide a mandatory courtesy confirmation on the final disbursement of a $500,000 cash-out refinance. I stopped breathing. My eyes locked onto the glowing monitor of my workstation. A cash-out refinance. On my house. The sprawling Seattle estate I had purchased entirely with my own money 2 years before I even met Trent. In the state of Washington, property acquired before a marriage is legally classified as separate property. Trent had absolutely zero legal claim to it. He had zero equity in it. Yet David was cheerfully informing me that $500,000 of my hard-earned home equity was about to be liquefied. I kept my voice terrifyingly level. Forensic accountants do not panic. We gather data. I asked David to repeat the exact details of the transaction and confirm the destination account for the funds. David happily obliged, reading off the devastating numbers. The loan documents had been submitted, signed, and fully notarized 3 days ago. The funds were scheduled to be wired directly into the joint checking account Trent managed by the end of the business day. $500,000 handed straight to a man who was actively funneling cash to Las Vegas casinos to feed his mother's crippling addiction. I asked David who had authorized the final signatures on the property deed. He stated that Trent had brought the paperwork into the branch personally complete, with my supposed signature and the official stamp of a licensed notary public. Trent had forged my signature. He had falsified federal banking documents to mortgage my premarital property entirely behind my back. The $75,000 he had embezzled from my salary was just the appetizer. The $500,000 fraudulent mortgage was the main course. He was literally betting the roof over my head to cover Barbara's massive gambling debts. If that wire transfer cleared today, the bank would hold a primary lien on my house. If Trent and Barbara blew that money at the blackjack tables, which they absolutely would, I would be the one legally responsible for paying back a massive loan I never took out. If I refused, the bank would foreclose on my sanctuary. They were actively trying to render me homeless to feed a toxic addiction. I did not yell at the loan director. I did not break down in tears. I utilized the absolute crushing authority of my profession. I instructed David to freeze the disbursement immediately. I cited federal banking regulations regarding suspected identity theft and mortgage fraud. I gave him my strict professional authorization code and demanded a hard stop on all outgoing wires connected to my Social Security number. David immediately shifted from cheerful to panicked, stammering rapid apologies as he scrambled to lock down the transaction on his end. The moment I hung up the office phone, I picked up my cell and dialed my personal wealth management attorney, Maxwell. He is a ruthless, highly efficient litigator who specializes in aggressive asset protection. He answered on the second ring. I bypassed the pleasantries entirely. I told Maxwell that my husband had just committed felony mortgage fraud. I instructed him to file an emergency injunction to freeze every single joint financial account attached to my name. I wanted the credit cards deactivated immediately. I wanted the checking accounts locked down tight. I wanted Trent completely cut off from the global financial system before his lunch hour even began. Maxwell did not ask emotional questions. He operates exactly like I do. He asked for the loan application numbers and the name of the fraudulent notary. He informed me that forging a spouse's signature on a real estate deed to secure a loan is a massive federal crime. Trent was looking at serious mandatory prison time for wire fraud and bank fraud. But Maxwell also delivered a sobering warning. He reminded me that desperate people do incredibly dangerous things when their financial lifelines are suddenly severed. The moment Trent tried to buy a coffee or wire another payment to Las Vegas, his cards would decline. He would immediately know that I had discovered his massive theft. He would know the $500,000 mortgage payout had been blocked. The illusion of his control was about to shatter and he would panic. A cold, sharp realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The mortgage fraud was a desperate, escalating move. Trent was running out of options to keep Barbara's aggressive bookies away. If he was willing to forge federal banking documents to steal $500,000, there was absolutely no limit to what he would do next. The $8 million trust fund. My Uncle Harrison's trust documents were legally ironclad, but the original physical paperwork proving my sole beneficiary status was still sitting inside my heavy steel safe down in my basement. Barbara had tried to find the keys to that safe just a few hours ago. Trent knew exactly where that safe was located. If Trent managed to destroy those original documents or forge a new power of attorney before I could secure them in a corporate bank vault, he could drag my inheritance into years of agonizing, expensive probate litigation. He could freeze my $8 million just out of pure, malicious spite. I thanked Maxwell and ended the call abruptly. I did not waste another second. I grabbed my car keys, abandoned my leather briefcase on the desk alongside the freshly printed fraud evidence, and ran out of my private office. I bypassed the elevators, completely sprinting down the concrete stairs to the underground parking garage. My heels echoed sharply against the walls, marking the countdown to an inevitable disaster. Trent and Barbara thought they were playing a clever game of suburban deception. They thought they could slowly bleed me dry and leave me holding the bag for their criminal behavior. They were entirely wrong. I threw my car into gear and sped out of the financial district, heading straight back to the house. I had to reach that basement safe before my husband realized his fraudulent empire was currently collapsing around him. The drive back to the Seattle suburbs was a violent blur of gray asphalt and pouring rain. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my car until my knuckles turned completely white. My mind processed the rapidly accelerating timeline with clinical precision. Trent had absolutely received the automated notification that his $500,000 wire transfer had been blocked by the bank. He knew the mortgage fraud had failed spectacularly. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind of threat, and Trent was a very desperate animal tied directly to a mother with a ravenous gambling addiction. I pushed my car well over the speed limit, knowing that every single second counted. I had to secure the original trust documents before his panic turned into destructive action. I pulled sharply into the driveway of our sprawling estate. Trent's car was parked haphazardly near the garage doors, sitting at an aggressive angle that suggested he had arrived in a frantic rush. Barbara's luxury SUV was nowhere to be seen. I killed the engine and stepped out into the freezing rain, my eyes immediately scanning the exterior of the property. The heavy custom oak front door of our home was slightly ajar. Splinters of expensive wood littered the welcome mat, mixing with the muddy rain. It was a poorly staged break-in. A forensic accountant knows a manufactured crime scene when she sees one. The decorative glass pane near the brass handle was shattered, but the glass shards had fallen outward onto the porch, not inward onto the foyer rug. Whoever broke that window did it from the inside of the house to make it look like an external breach. They were sloppy. They were acting strictly on adrenaline and fear. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped into the foyer. The house was dead silent. My expensive decorative vases were knocked over and a few drawers in the hallway console were pulled completely out and dumped on the floor. But nothing of actual value was missing from the ground floor. The giant flat-screen television remained securely mounted to the living room wall. My vintage artwork still hung untouched. Real burglars grab high-value electronics and bolt as fast as humanly possible. They do not bypass $10,000 worth of easily fenced items to smash a few decorative bowls. I did not waste my time checking the rest of the upper floors. My pulse hammered a steady rhythmic beat against my ribs as I headed straight for the basement door located just off the kitchen. The heavy steel deadbolt I had personally installed just last year was completely obliterated. The reinforced metal frame was twisted and torn from the drywall, groaning loudly as I pushed the door wide open. A harsh, acrid smell hit my nostrils, instantly burning the back of my throat. It was the sharp, unmistakable stench of vaporized metal, melted plastic, and scorched ozone. Acetylene. Someone had used an industrial blowtorch inside my home. I descended the wooden stairs rapidly, my heels clicking sharply against the steps, the sound echoing in the cavernous underground space. A thin haze of toxic gray smoke hung in the stagnant basement air. At the far end of the room, bolted securely to the thick concrete foundation, sat my custom-built 200-kilogram steel safe. It was a top-tier security vault designed specifically to withstand raging house fires, massive floods, and natural disasters, but it was absolutely not designed to withstand a focused, high-temperature cutting torch wielded by a desperate, greedy man with nothing left to lose. The thick steel door of the safe hung horribly askew on melted, glowing hinges. The complex digital locking mechanism had been completely liquefied into a puddle of cooling, blackened slag that dripped onto the concrete floor. The intense heat of the torch had severely scorched the ground and blistered the nearby drywall, leaving a massive black burn mark against the pristine white paint. I stepped closer, waving away the lingering bitter smoke, and peered into the dark, ruined cavity of the vault. It was completely empty. The thick manila envelopes were gone. The notarized certificates had vanished. The original wedding signatures from my late uncle establishing me as the sole uncontested beneficiary of his $8 million trust fund had been entirely wiped out. My emergency cash reserves, my backup passports, and the irreplaceable vintage family heirloom jewelry my uncle had left me were missing. The physical manifestation of my entire financial security had been brutally stolen to feed the insatiable black hole of Barbara's Las Vegas casino debts. The sheer audacity of the destruction made my blood run entirely cold. Heavy, deliberate footsteps sounded on the hardwood floor directly above me. I turned around slowly, my fists clenched so tightly my fingernails dug painfully into my palms. Trent stood at the very top of the basement stairs. He was leaning casually against the broken doorframe, his arms crossed arrogantly over his chest. He was not out of breath. He was not acting like a terrified homeowner who had just discovered a massive, violent burglary. He was wearing the exact same clothes from this morning, though his shirt cuffs were rolled up to his elbows, and a faint, undeniable smudge of black soot stained his right cheek. He looked down at me standing in the ashes of my destroyed safe. The corners of his mouth twitched upward into a sickening, triumphant smirk. He thought he had completely outsmarted me. He thought that by stealing the physical documents, he had successfully paralyzed my access to the $8 million. He actually believed he had manufactured the ultimate undeniable leverage to force me into paying off his mother's staggering criminal debts. He looked at me with eyes that were cold, calculating and utterly devoid of the man I thought I had married. "The house got robbed, honey. What a shame." Trent said the words slowly, his voice dripping with condescending, arrogant mockery. He let the cruel statement hang in the smoky air, fully expecting me to break down, scream, or fall to my knees in absolute despair. It looks like the burglars took everything of value. Trent continued, taking one slow step down the stairs to emphasize his towering position. It is going to be incredibly difficult for you to prove you own that massive trust fund, now without the original paperwork. Such a massive, unfortunate tragedy for you. The absolute rage boiling inside my chest was entirely suffocating. He was openly mocking me. He had destroyed my property, stolen my inheritance, and was now gloating about his felony crimes directly to my face. The audience of my own mind screamed for immediate violent retribution. I wanted to rip that smug, disgusting smile right off his soot-stained face. But a forensic accountant never strikes when the enemy expects it. I stared back up at my treacherous husband, locking away my furious anger behind a wall of pure ice, preparing to let him dig his own inescapable grave. My thumb hovered over the glowing screen of my smartphone. The numbers 911 were already typed into the keypad. I just needed to press the bright green call button to bring the Seattle Police Department swarming into my destroyed basement. I wanted to see Trent pinned against the cold concrete floor in handcuffs right then and there. I wanted to watch his arrogant, soot-stained smirk melt into absolute undeniable terror as he was arrested for felony destruction of property and grand theft. But before my finger could make contact with the glass, the device vibrated violently in my palm. A text message from an entirely unregistered number illuminated the display. I glanced down, expecting an automated fraud alert from my banking software. Instead, the precise words on the screen made the blood freeze in my veins. "Do not call the police. Walk out the front door and come to the corner cafe right now. They are actively planning to strip away your basic human rights." I stared at the glowing letters, my mind racing through complex threat assessments. A forensic accountant relies exclusively on cold, hard data and verified sources, but my razor-sharp gut instinct screamed that this anonymous warning was entirely legitimate. Someone inside their inner circle had defected. I looked back up at Trent. He was still leaning casually against the broken doorframe at the top of the stairs, waiting for me to shatter into a million emotional pieces so he could record my breakdown. "You can keep the empty safe, Trent." I stated, my voice eerily calm, betraying absolutely zero panic. I slipped my phone smoothly into the pocket of my tailored blazer. He frowned, clearly disappointed and visibly unsettled by my total lack of hysterical sobbing. I walked straight up the wooden stairs with heavy, deliberate steps, forcing him to shift awkwardly backward to avoid my shoulder. I did not run. I did not look back at the ruined vault. I marched straight out the front door, stepping carefully over the shattered glass of his pathetic staged break-in, and headed directly down the wet suburban street. The local independent coffee shop was located exactly 3 blocks away from our estate. The brass bell above the door chimed as I stepped out of the heavy, freezing Seattle rain. The afternoon crowd was sparse, mostly remote tech workers wearing headphones and staring at glowing laptops. Sitting in the furthest, darkest corner booth, partially obscured by a large potted fern, was Jada. Jada was 31 years old, a highly successful corporate defense attorney, and the wife of Trent's younger brother Connor. She was a brilliant, fiercely independent African-American woman who had always possessed an intimidating, razor-sharp intellect. We had always maintained a quiet, unspoken mutual respect, mostly because we were the only 2 women in this toxic extended family who actually worked for our own wealth rather than marrying into it. She wore a pristine beige trench coat, and her dark, observant eyes locked onto mine the second I entered the room. I slid into the worn leather booth directly across from her. Jada did not bother with fake pleasantries or small talk. She immediately pushed a thick, heavily redacted legal folder across the sticky wooden table. "I intercepted the text messages between Trent and Connor this morning," Jada stated, keeping her voice low and completely steady. "My weak, spineless husband forgot to log out of his cloud account on our shared home office computer. Trent and Barbara are not just trying to steal your physical inheritance documents, Sydney. They are moving to execute a full legal takeover of your entire existence." I opened the heavy manila folder. Inside were freshly drafted unfiled court petitions. My eyes scanned the aggressive, terrifying legal jargon. The words involuntary psychiatric hold and emergency conservatorship leaped off the crisp white pages like venomous snakes. My heart slammed violently against my ribs. I looked up at Jada in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. "They want a conservatorship?" I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Jada nodded grimly, tapping her manicured fingernail against the documents. "Just like the courts do to wealthy celebrities who have highly publicized mental breakdowns. Barbara is actively using the glitter bomb incident to paint you as violently paranoid and dangerously unhinged. They hired a shady off-the-books psychiatrist who owes Barbara money from the casino. He is prepared to sign a sworn medical affidavit claiming you are a severe danger to yourself and others. If they get a corrupt judge to sign this emergency order tomorrow morning, Trent officially becomes your legal guardian." The air in my lungs suddenly felt incredibly thin. The legal implications were catastrophic. He gets complete unrestricted control over your medical decisions, your bank accounts, your business assets, and your $8 million trust fund. Jada continued detailing the nightmare scenario with clinical precision. "You would not even be allowed to hire your own lawyer to fight back because Trent would control the checkbook. You would become a legal prisoner in your own home." I closed the folder, feeling a wave of profound acidic nausea wash over me. "Why are you helping me, Jada? Why risk your own marriage and your legal career to warn me about their trap?" Jada let out a harsh, bitter laugh that contained zero humor. "Connor is exactly like Trent. A weak, pathetic enabler who bows to Barbara's every toxic demand to secure his place in her fake high society world. For years, Barbara has directed disgusting racist microaggressions at me at every single family Thanksgiving dinner. She constantly belittles my corporate career, criticizes my heritage, and treats me like a second-class citizen who infiltrated her pristine white suburban family. Connor never defends me. He just tells me to keep the peace and ignore her. When I saw these conservatorship documents today, I realized they are not just toxic. They are literal monsters. If I let them do this to you, I am no better than they are. I am serving Connor with divorce papers next week. But first, we are going to burn Barbara's entire criminal empire to the ground." A slow, highly dangerous smile spread across my face. The initial paralyzing shock of the conservatorship plot rapidly transformed into a hyper-focused, tactical rage. Jada was a ruthless corporate defense attorney. I was a veteran forensic accountant. Together, we were an unstoppable legal and financial wrecking ball. "They want to play dirty legal games," I said, resting my hands firmly on top of the evidence folder. "Then we are going to let them think they are winning. We are going to walk right into their trap and drag them down into a federal penitentiary." Jada leaned forward over the table, her eyes shining with pure, calculating vengeance. "We fight poison with poison, Sydney. They desperately need a crazy woman to make their fraudulent court documents look legitimate. Let us give them the performance of a lifetime. Let us break down exactly how this legal nightmare operates," Jada said, sliding another thick document from the heavy manila envelope. The word conservatorship sounds protective, but in the hands of a malicious actor, it is a legalized form of human trafficking. If Trent succeeds, you lose your right to vote, your right to drive, and your right to hire your own attorney. He will control your cell phone, your emails, and your physical movements. He can legally lock you in a psychiatric facility and drain your $8 million trust fund completely dry to pay for your supposed medical care. I stared at the heavily redacted court petition, feeling a surge of pure, unfiltered adrenaline replacing my initial shock. The sheer scale of their predatory ambition was astounding. They did not just want to rob me, they wanted to erase my autonomy completely. Barbara has been laying the groundwork for this entire operation for months. Jada continued, tapping a manicured finger against a printed email exchange. "She has been telling the extended family that you are overworked, severely paranoid, and prone to violent mood swings. That glitter bomb you set off last night was the perfect catalyst. To a judge who does not know you, rigging an explosive device in your own bedroom looks like textbook psychotic behavior." I crossed my arms, leaning back against the worn leather of the coffee shop booth. And who exactly is the medical professional willing to risk his federal license to diagnose me without a proper clinical evaluation? Jada flipped to the last page of the file. Dr. Eris Thorne. He is a disgraced psychiatrist who runs a cash-only concierge clinic downtown. He also happens to share a mutual bookie with Barbara down in Las Vegas. He owes the same casino syndicate over $200,000. Barbara promised to pay off his gambling debts using your inheritance the moment Trent gains legal control of your assets. Thorne is prepared to sign an emergency medical affidavit tonight declaring you an immediate danger to yourself. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with devastating clarity. As a forensic accountant, I admire a well-structured fraud scheme, but this was remarkably sloppy. They were acting out of pure frantic desperation. "They are moving too fast," I stated, my voice dropping to a low, calculating pitch. Trent is arrogant, but he is fundamentally stupid when it comes to federal financial law. If he files an emergency petition for conservatorship in a state court, he is legally required to submit a sworn disclosure of our joint marital assets under the penalty of perjury. Jada smiled a sharp, predatory expression that matched my own. Exactly. And since he just forged your signature to secure a $500,000 mortgage and subsequently wired $75,000 to a Vegas money laundering front, his financial disclosure will be a fabricated lie. If he submits that fraudulent financial affidavit to a judge, he commits felony perjury on top of wire fraud and bank fraud. I concluded, feeling a rush of cold satisfaction. He is literally handing us the rope to hang him with. But we need him to actually file that paperwork. We need him to commit to the lie on the federal record. To get him to file that petition tomorrow morning, Jada said, lowering her voice as a barista walked past our table. He needs the medical affidavit signed by Dr. Thorne tonight. And to get that signature, they need you to have a highly documented, undeniable mental breakdown in front of witnesses. I picked up my coffee cup, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The dark roast was bitter, perfectly matching the situation. Then I will give them the greatest theatrical performance of my entire life. I will play the deranged, hysterical wife so convincingly that Trent will practically beg the judge to lock me away. Jada pulled a sleek silver pen from her trench coat pocket and began drafting a rapid timeline on a fresh legal pad. Trent is bringing Dr. Thorne to your house this evening under the guise of a marital counseling session. Barbara will be there playing the terrified, victimized mother-in-law. They will try to corner you, gaslight you, and push every single one of your emotional buttons until you snap. They want you to scream. They want you to break things. They want to record you looking entirely out of control. I will not just break things. I countered, my mind racing with strategic possibilities. I will make sure my behavior perfectly aligns with the exact symptoms of severe paranoia they have outlined in their petition. I will accuse them of stealing my money. I will act terrified of my own husband. It will look like a classic paranoid delusion to the naked eye, but every word out of my mouth will be the absolute literal truth. While you are keeping them distracted with your performance, Jada said, sliding the legal pad toward me, I will be finalizing a comprehensive federal dossier. I have already contacted a former colleague who now works as a senior prosecutor for the United States Attorney Office. The moment Trent tries to force you into signing any medical power of attorney documents tonight, I am hitting send on a massive federal wire fraud tip. I looked at the timeline Jada had meticulously mapped out. It was tight, dangerous, and required absolute nerves of steel. If my performance was not convincing enough, Dr. Thorne might refuse to sign the affidavit. If I broke character and revealed what I actually knew about their crimes too early, Trent would panic and destroy the evidence on his laptop before the federal agents arrived. I have to walk back into that house and pretend I am a broken, terrified woman, I said, finalizing the operational strategy in my head. I have to look Trent in the eyes and let him believe he has completely broken my spirit. Jada reached across the sticky wooden table and gripped my hand tightly. You are the strongest woman I know, Sydney. You track down international corporate criminals for a living. These people are pathetic suburban grifters. They have absolutely no idea what kind of hell they have just unleashed. I squeezed her hand back, solidifying our powerful unspoken alliance. We were two women who had been chronically underestimated by a family of arrogant parasites. Tonight, the parasites would face their ultimate eradication. I gathered the redacted court documents and placed them carefully inside my heavy leather briefcase. I stood up from the booth, smoothing the wrinkles from my tailored charcoal blazer. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the Seattle streets slick and reflecting the gray afternoon light. Prepare the federal tip, Jada. I commanded, my voice devoid of any hesitation. I am going home to lose my mind. The drive back to the estate felt remarkably different this time. I was no longer a woman reacting to a sudden betrayal. I was a forensic accountant walking into a hostile audit fully armed. I parked my car in the garage and took a deep, steadying breath. It was time to give the performance that would secure their federal prison sentences. I opened the front door to the overwhelming smell of roasted garlic and rosemary. Trent was standing in the kitchen wearing a pristine apron over his crisp, button-down shirt. He turned toward me with an expression of manufactured, sickeningly sweet concern. He looked exactly like the picture-perfect loving husband striving to hold his broken marriage together. Barbara was seated at the far end of the long dining table, nursing a large glass of red wine. She wore a thick, high-necked sweater, purposely chosen to conceal any lingering traces of the ultraviolet tracking ink on her chest and neck. She visibly flinched and pulled her chair back slightly when I walked into the room, playing the role of the deeply traumatized victim to absolute perfection. Sitting directly across from her was a man I had never seen before. He wore a rumpled tweed jacket and thick wire-rimmed glasses. He possessed the greasy, desperate aura of a man drowning in casino debt, trying desperately to masquerade as a respected medical professional. "Sydney, sweetheart," Trent said, his voice dripping with artificial gentleness. "I am so glad you are home safely. I took the liberty of inviting a guest for dinner. This is Dr. Eris Thorne. He is a highly respected family therapist. I thought having a mediated professional conversation tonight could help us process the intense stress we have all been experiencing lately." I looked at Dr. Thorne. He stood up and extended a hand with a practiced, sympathetic smile. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Sydney. Trent has told me so much about the immense pressure you carry at your accounting firm. We are just here to create a safe space for healing and communication." I ignored his outstretched hand. I let my eyes dart rapidly around the room, widening them just enough to mimic the frantic, disorganized gaze of someone losing their grip on reality. I pulled my purse tightly against my chest, hunching my shoulders inward. "Why is there a stranger in my house?" I asked, injecting a high, trembling pitch into my voice. My heart rate remained a calm, steady 60 beats per minute, but I forced my breathing to become shallow and erratic. "Now, Sydney, there is no need to be defensive," Dr. Thorne said smoothly, lowering himself back into his chair and pulling out a small, leather-bound notepad. "Your husband simply reached out because he is deeply concerned about your well-being. He mentioned you had a rather frightening episode last night involving an explosive device in your closet." The psychological gaslighting began immediately. He was not asking a legitimate medical question. He was aggressively leading a witness. He wanted me to react violently to the word explosive so he could document my aggression on paper. "It was not an explosive," I stammered, stepping backward until my spine hit the hallway wall. I let my hands shake, visibly gripping the leather strap of my purse. "It was a security measure. People are stealing from me. My money is disappearing. Someone took $75,000 from my bank accounts." Trent exchanged a heavy, sorrowful look with Dr. Thorne. He sighed loudly, rubbing his temples as if carrying the weight of the world. "See what I mean, doctor? She is entirely fixated on these financial delusions. She works so hard at the firm, she has convinced herself her own family is robbing her blind." Barbara dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a linen napkin. "She accused me of taking her money, Dr. Thorne. Me, a frail widow. She set a vicious trap to blind me because she thought I was stealing loose cash. I have never been so terrified in my own home. Dr. Thorne scribbled furiously on his notepad. His eyes flicked up to analyze me entirely devoid of actual medical empathy. Sydney paranoia regarding financial assets is a very common symptom of severe burnout and mental exhaustion. When we lose our grip on reality, we often project malicious intent onto the people who love us most. Do you often feel like your husband and mother-in-law are conspiring against you in secret? It was a brilliantly constructed psychological trap. If I denied it, I was lying and resisting treatment. If I confirmed it, I was explicitly admitting to textbook paranoid delusions. I chose to lean entirely into the madness they desperately wanted to see. They are conspiring against me, I shrieked, letting my voice crack with manufactured panic. I pointed a trembling finger directly at Trent. He is taking my money to Las Vegas. He is trying to take my house. He cut open the safe in the basement with a blowtorch today. He stole my uncle's trust fund documents. Trent stood up slowly, holding his hands out in a placating, non-threatening gesture perfectly designed for the doctor's observation. Sydney, please lower your voice. Nobody took a blowtorch to anything. You are having an episode. You are confused and frightened, but you are safe here. We just want to get you the medical help you desperately need. Dr. Thorne adjusted his glasses, writing another lengthy paragraph. Sydney, these are very severe accusations. Believing your husband is destroying a steel vault with an industrial blowtorch is a highly specific, frightening hallucination. Are you experiencing any other visual or auditory disturbances? Do you feel like you are in immediate danger right now? I let out a ragged, desperate sob. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the hardwood floor, pulling my knees up tightly to my chest. I rocked back and forth slightly. I am not hallucinating, I cried out, ensuring my voice sounded entirely broken and frantic. He wants to lock me away. He wants to take my $8 million. He forged my signature on a mortgage. I know what he did. I know what they are both doing to me. Barbara let out a dramatic gasp and covered her mouth. Doctor, you see how severe it is. She is completely detached from reality. She is fabricating millions of dollars in her head to justify her violent behavior. She is going to hurt one of us if she is not medicated and contained immediately. Dr. Thorne nodded gravely, closing his leather notebook with a definitive snap. He looked at Trent with an expression of grim professional certainty. Trent, I have seen enough. Your wife is exhibiting classic advanced signs of paranoid schizophrenia, accompanied by severe persecutory delusions. She represents a clear and present danger to herself and to the occupants of this household. Trent knelt down a few feet away from me, maintaining a cautious, fearful distance. He looked exactly like a man making the most painful decision of his life, but I could clearly see the cold, victorious gleam shining deep in his eyes. He thought he had absolutely won. He thought he had successfully manipulated me into providing the exact legal ammunition he needed to seize my entire existence. What do we do, Doctor? Trent asked, his voice thick with fake choking emotion. I cannot lose my wife to this terrible illness. I have to protect her from herself. I kept my head buried in my knees, forcing my shoulders to shake as if I were weeping uncontrollably. In the dark sanctuary of my own mind, I was smiling a ruthless, predatory smile. The trap was set perfectly. The bait was taken. Now they just needed to spring the lock and permanently seal their own destruction. I slowly uncurled my arms from around my knees and pushed myself up from the hardwood floor. I made sure my legs trembled noticeably, giving the distinct impression that my physical strength was failing under the immense weight of my manufactured delusions. I kept my breathing shallow and erratic. Every single movement was carefully choreographed. A forensic accountant knows that a solid audit trail requires irrefutable documentation. If Trent and Barbara wanted documentation of a madwoman, I was going to give them a high-definition award-winning performance. I stumbled backward toward the kitchen island, clutching the edge of the cool marble countertop, as if I needed it to stay upright. Trent followed me with slow, exaggerated steps. He held his hands up in a placating gesture, palms facing outward. He was playing the role of the terrified, long-suffering husband flawlessly. but my highly trained eyes caught the subtle, triumphant shift in his posture. He glanced quickly over his shoulder toward the dining table. I followed his line of sight. Barbara was still sitting in her chair, clutching her wineglass with one hand. With her other hand, she was discreetly angling her smartphone toward me, resting it against the edge of the wooden table. The screen was darkened to avoid drawing attention, but I could clearly see the tiny, pulsing red indicator light reflecting off the polished surface of the table. She was recording a video. They were actively documenting my breakdown to submit as hard video evidence to a judge tomorrow morning. My heart soared with a dark, ruthless joy. They thought they were capturing proof of my insanity. In reality, they were manufacturing the exact audio and video evidence I needed to prove their coordinated extortion plot. Everything I was about to say on that recording would eventually be verified by federal investigators as absolute, undeniable fact. They were literally recording their own legal confessions, and they were too stupid to realize it. Do not come any closer to me, I screamed, letting my voice crack with sheer panic. I swiped my hand backward across the counter, my fingers searching blindly until they wrapped around the edge of a heavy, decorative ceramic dinner plate. I picked it up, holding it defensively against my chest. You are all working together. You want to lock me in a hospital so you can steal my $8 million. Trent stopped dead in his tracks. He turned his head slightly, making absolutely sure his profile was perfectly caught in Barbara's camera frame. Sydney, honey, please put the plate down, he pleaded, injecting a pathetic tremor into his voice. Nobody is trying to steal your money. We are incredibly wealthy. We do not need your inheritance. You are having a severe paranoid episode. Please let Dr. Thorne help you before you hurt someone. He was feeding lines directly into the microphone. He was establishing a false narrative of our financial stability for the judge, trying to mask the fact that he had just committed massive mortgage fraud to cover his mother's staggering casino debts. You are lying, I shrieked, taking another erratic step backward. You cut open my safe. You wired $75,000 to Las Vegas. I saw the bank statements. You are trying to poison me and take everything I own. I raised the heavy ceramic plate high above my head. I locked eyes with Trent, letting him see the wild, unhinged terror I had plastered across my face. Then, with a loud, guttural scream, I hurled the plate directly downward at the ceramic tile floor. The impact was deafening. The thick plate shattered into 100 razor-sharp fragments that exploded outward, scattering across the kitchen floor in a violent spray of white porcelain. The sharp, violent noise echoed through the open concept house like a gunshot. Barbara let out a dramatic, piercing shriek, for the camera burying her face in her hands. Oh my God, she is completely violent. Trent, get away from her. She is going to kill us all. Dr. Thorne leaped up from his chair, clutching his leather notebook tightly against his chest. He took several rapid steps backward, putting a safe distance between himself and the shattered porcelain. Trent, do not engage with her physically, the fake psychiatrist ordered, projecting his voice loudly so the smartphone microphone would pick up his professional medical assessment. Her delusions have escalated into active physical aggression. She is demonstrating severe, uncontrollable psychomotor agitation. This is an extremely dangerous situation. We need to proceed with extreme caution. I collapsed against the stainless steel refrigerator, sliding down until I was sitting on the cold floor, completely surrounded by the jagged shards of the broken plate. I buried my face in my hands, forcing my shoulders to heave violently as I unleashed a string of broken, ragged sobs. I wailed about the missing trust fund documents. I cried about the invisible ink. I babbled incoherently about how they were all plotting to ruin my life. I gave them everything they needed. Every broken sob, every frantic accusation, every shattered piece of ceramic on the floor was a meticulously calculated data point. I was feeding their fraudulent conservatorship petition line by line. I was giving Dr. Thorne the exact behavioral symptoms he needed to justify signing an emergency medical hold tonight. Behind the safety of my hands, shielded entirely from Barbara's camera lens, my face was completely dry. There was no terror. There was no madness. There was only the cold, mechanical precision of a predator observing her prey walk willingly into a steel cage. Trent slowly backed away from the kitchen, retreating to the dining room where his mother and the fake doctor stood waiting. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, shaking his head in manufactured despair. "I do not know what else to do," Dr. Thorne, Trent said, his voice dripping with fake agony. "She is completely gone. I cannot keep her safe in this house anymore. I have to make the hard choice to protect her." I stayed curled on the floor, listening to the satisfying sound of my husband sealing his own fate. They had the video. They had the broken plate. They had the medical diagnosis. They were riding high on the absolute certainty of their victory. They had no idea that the noose they were so proudly weaving for me was already wrapped securely around their own necks. Trent gingerly stepped over the shattered porcelain scattered across the kitchen floor. He extended a hand to me, his voice dripping with honeyed manufactured concern. "Come on, Sydney. Let us get you away from this mess before you cut yourself." I allowed him to pull me up, letting my legs wobble uncontrollably beneath me. I leaned heavily against his chest, playing the role of the exhausted broken woman whose mind had finally snapped under the weight of her own paranoid delusions. He guided my supposedly fragile body out of the kitchen and lowered me onto the plush leather sofa in the center of our living room. I curled into a tight ball, shivering violently, as if the adrenaline had completely drained from my system. "I am going to make you some chamomile tea," Trent said loudly, ensuring Dr. Thorne and Barbara captured every single syllable of his empathy on their recording. "It will help soothe your nerves, sweetheart. Just rest right here. I will be right back." I watched through half-closed eyes as he walked back into the kitchen. He was out of direct line of sight from the living room seating area, but a forensic accountant is trained to notice every microscopic discrepancy in human behavior. I caught the subtle, sharp movement of his hand reaching deep into his tailored trouser pocket before he grabbed a ceramic mug from the upper cabinet. He was not just steeping tea leaves and stirring in honey. He was dissolving a heavy dose of chemical compliance directly into my drink. A few minutes later, Trent returned to the living room holding a steaming mug. He sat carefully on the edge of the glass coffee table, leaning in close so I could smell the herbal aroma. "Drink this honey to calm down," he whispered, pressing the warm ceramic into my trembling hands. The scent of chamomile hit my nose, but it was heavily masked by a faint, chalky medicinal undertone. It was an absolute amateur hour chemical spike. They had likely crushed up whatever prescription sedatives Barbara had left over from her last casino-induced panic attack. "It is too hot," I whimpered, stalling for time while maintaining my erratic, frightened persona. "I cannot drink it yet." Trent patted my knee patiently, playing his role perfectly for the audience sitting just a few feet away. "Just take small sips, Sydney. Dr. Thorne says you need to relax your central nervous system so we can figure out how to help you." I brought the mug to my lips. I tilted my head back, concealing the rim of the cup behind my cupped hands. I did not swallow a single drop of the tainted liquid. Instead, I let the hot, bitter tea run down my chin and soak directly into the thick, dark gray fabric of my oversized cardigan. I performed this precise maneuver 3 separate times, making loud swallowing noises and sighing heavily as if the warm sedative was entering my stomach. When Trent briefly turned his head to signal Dr. Thorne that I was complying, I swiftly dumped the remaining contents of the mug directly into the dry soil of the large potted fiddle leaf fig plant resting against the side of the sofa. I placed the empty mug onto the glass coffee table with a soft, definitive clink. I let my head loll backward against the leather cushions. I forced my breathing to slow down drastically, mimicking the heavy, rhythmic respirations of a chemically induced stupor. I let my eyelids flutter, fighting a fake physical battle against the heavy drug, before letting them slide completely shut. I let my arms go entirely limp, dropping lifelessly to my sides. The tense silence in the living room shifted instantly. The stifling artificial atmosphere of deep medical concern vanished into thin air, replaced by something incredibly predatory. I heard the distinct, sharp click of Barbara locking her smartphone screen. The recording had officially ended. The dramatic performance was over. Is she completely out? Barbara asked. Her voice was no longer trembling or frail. It was sharp, grating, and filled with aggressive, greedy impatience. She is out cold, Trent replied, his tone dropping an octave into something brutally pragmatic and cruel. He grabbed my shoulder and shook me roughly. Sydney. Hey, Sydney, wake up. I did not react. I let my head roll lifelessly with the violent motion of his hand. Trent let out a sharp, victorious laugh that made my stomach turn. That dosage knocked her out significantly faster than I expected, Trent noted with smug satisfaction. Grab the legal paperwork, Mom. We need to get this done right now before the medication begins to wear off. I heard the distinct rustle of heavy cardstock being pulled from a leather portfolio. Dr. Thorne cleared his throat, his professional demeanor evaporating into pure criminal transaction. I have successfully completed the emergency medical affidavit, the fake psychiatrist stated in a hushed, hurried tone. It legally certifies that she is experiencing an acute violent psychotic break and requires immediate involuntary institutionalization and full financial conservatorship. My signature is on the dotted line. I trust my compensation will be wired to my offshore holding account by tomorrow morning. Trent, the absolute moment I gain legal control of her banking portal. Your massive casino debts are fully cleared. Aris. Trent answered dismissively. Now hand me the power of attorney forms. We need her physical signature and a clear thumbprint while she is heavily sedated and compliant. I heard Barbara step much closer to the sofa. I could smell the stale red wine on her breath and the lingering metallic scent of the ultraviolet tracking glitter she had utterly failed to wash off her skin. Make sure you press the ballpoint pen firmly into her hand, Trent Barbara commanded ruthlessly, her greed entirely unfiltered. The county judge will throw out the entire petition if the signature looks too shaky or forced. We need a clear, highly legible sign off on the full financial release. I am not losing my lifestyle to those Vegas bookies just because you cannot forge a straight line. I know exactly what I am doing. Trent snapped back, his patience clearly wearing thin under his mother's aggressive, demanding oversight. I felt his heavy, sweaty hands grab my right wrist, lifting my limp arm from the leather cushion. He slapped a thick, heavy stack of legal documents onto the glass coffee table right in front of my face. I heard the sharp, metallic click of a premium ballpoint pen being engaged. They were standing right over me, completely exposed and buzzing with malicious anticipation. They were looking at my supposedly unconscious body, seeing absolutely nothing but an $8 million human bank account ready to be drained. They truly believed they had successfully drugged a highly trained forensic accountant into signing away her basic human rights. They had absolutely no idea that every single word they just spoke, every horrific admission of their premeditated conspiracy, had firmly sealed their destiny. They were preparing to force a pen into my hand, utterly blind to the fact that I was fully awake, fully aware, and heavily armed with the absolute truth. Trent grasped my right wrist with his clammy fingers. The cold metal of the premium ballpoint pen pressed sharply against my palm. He was literally positioning my hand over the signature line of the financial release form, ready to force my fingers to trace my own name. I did not wait for him to apply downward pressure. I did not blink groggily. I did not pretend to wake from a deep slumber. I snapped my eyes wide open, locked my gaze directly onto his face, and sat up perfectly straight. The physical recoil was instantaneous. Trent gasped, dropping my wrist, as if my skin had suddenly caught fire. He stumbled backward in sheer terror, his calves hitting the heavy edge of the glass coffee table. The stack of legal documents scattered wildly across the polished surface. Barbara let out a sharp, choked noise, her wine glass sloshing dark red liquid all over the front of her expensive sweater. Dr. Thorne froze completely, his hands hovering uselessly over his forged medical affidavit. The room, which just seconds ago buzzed with the arrogant energy of a successful heist, plunged into a suffocating, terrified silence. That chamomile blend was a truly pathetic attempt at chemical submission, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute crystalline clarity. I brushed an imaginary speck of dust from my charcoal blazer and crossed my legs elegantly on the leather sofa. If you are going to drug a forensic accountant, you really need to do your research on proper dosages and absorption rates. Dumping a crushed-up handful of leftover casino anxiety pills into hot water leaves a distinctly chalky residue at the bottom of the mug. I strongly suggest you check the soil of the fiddle leaf fig plant if you want your sedative back. The realization hit them like a physical blow. The illusion of the broken paranoid wife evaporated into thin air. Trent looked from my perfectly calm face to the potted plant, sitting next to the sofa, connecting the dots in real time. His expression transitioned from shock to sheer, unadulterated panic, and finally into raw, desperate fury. The caring husband facade shattered completely into a million jagged pieces. There were no more fake tears. There was no more gentle, placating tone. He was a cornered rat facing the absolute ruin of his fraudulent empire. "Lock the front door," Barbara hissed, her voice vibrating with sudden, vicious urgency. "Trent, lock the door right now. Do not let her out of this room." Trent practically lunged across the foyer. I heard the heavy metallic thud of the deadbolt sliding into place, followed by the sharp click of the security chain. He stood blocking the entryway, his chest heaving, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He was effectively committing false imprisonment, adding yet another major felony to his rapidly growing rap sheet. Barbara marched forward, no longer pretending to be a frail, victimized elder. She stepped right up to the coffee table and slammed her palm down flat against the scattered legal papers. The polite, wealthy suburban mother-in-law was entirely gone. In her place stood a ruthless, predatory gambling addict who was staring down the barrel of massive syndicate debts and running completely out of time. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Sydney," Barbara sneered, her face twisting into a mask of pure venom. "You think pouring out a cup of tea saves you from this reality? It does not change a single thing. The camera is turned off. The performance is over. We have exactly what we need to destroy you." She snatched the medical affidavit from Dr. Thorne and shoved it mere inches from my face. "Look at this signature. You have officially been diagnosed as severely mentally incompetent by a licensed medical professional. We have high-definition video evidence of you screaming about invisible ink and smashing porcelain plates in a psychotic rage. You are legally insane as of 10 minutes ago. No judge in the state will ever believe a word you say." Trent walked back into the living room, standing shoulder to shoulder with his mother. The intimidation tactic was painfully obvious, but it felt entirely pathetic to a woman who routinely stared down aggressive corporate embezzlers. "The game is over, Sydney," Trent growled, his voice stripped of all remaining humanity. "You are going to pick up that pen right now. You are going to sign this comprehensive power of attorney and grant me immediate unrestricted access to your bank accounts and your uncle's trust fund. You are going to sign over the deed to this house so I can clear the mortgage I took out." Barbara leaned in closer, her breath smelling foul with cheap wine and sheer desperation. "If you refuse to sign these papers tonight, Trent will submit this emergency medical affidavit to the county judge first thing tomorrow morning. You will be forcibly dragged out of this house by men in white coats and thrown into a locked psychiatric ward. You will be stripped of your phone, your career, and your freedom. You will spend the next 10 years heavily medicated in a padded room while we drain every single penny of your $8 million to pay for your mandatory treatment. Now pick up the damn pen and sign away your life." I did not flinch. I did not cower away from her aggressive posture. I looked at the forged medical document, then at the frantic, sweating face of the fake doctor, then at my treacherous husband, and finally at the toxic woman orchestrating this entire amateur extortion plot. They truly believed they held the ultimate trump card. They believed sheer psychological terror would force my absolute compliance. They thought threatening me with a psychiatric institution would break my spirit forever. I reached out slowly and picked up the premium ballpoint pen from the glass table. Trent let out a heavy, shaky breath of relief, visibly relaxing his shoulders. He actually thought I had finally surrendered to their psychological terrorism. He thought the blackmail had worked flawlessly. I rolled the cool metal of the pen between my fingers, feeling the satisfying weight of it. I remained perfectly seated on the sofa, looking up at the three criminals surrounding me. I was exactly where I needed them to be. They had locked the front door to keep me trapped inside, completely unaware that they had just locked themselves in a steel cage with an apex predator. I held the premium ballpoint pen between my thumb and index finger, feeling the heavy metal casing grow warm against my skin. Trent leaned in closer, his eyes fixed greedily on the signature line, waiting for his massive payout. Barbara stood rigid behind him, her breath catching in her throat with sheer anticipation. Instead of applying ink to the fraudulent document, I slowly and deliberately placed the pen back onto the glass coffee table. I let it roll away from the paperwork until it bumped gently against the base of my empty mug. Then I looked up directly into Barbara's eyes and smiled. It was not a smile of surrender or defeat. It was the terrifying cold smile of a predator watching a steel snare pull tight around its prey. "You really are a creature of habit, Barbara," I stated, leaning back into the soft leather of the sofa and crossing my arms over my chest. "You lack any real criminal imagination. Fraudsters who rely on the exact same playbook eventually leave a trail of breadcrumbs so obvious that even a first-year accounting student could follow it. But a veteran forensic accountant and a ruthless corporate defense attorney working together do not just follow the breadcrumbs. We unearth the entire bakery and burn it to the ground." Trent frowned deeply, his eyes darting frantically between me and his mother. "What are you talking about, Sydney?" he demanded, his voice edged with fresh panic. "Stop stalling and sign the paper right now." But Barbara did not speak. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving her skin an unhealthy ashen gray beneath the glowing remnants of the ultraviolet tracking ink. Her confident, predatory posture instantly collapsed. "I am talking about your Aunt Clara," I continued, keeping my voice perfectly level and maintaining unblinking eye contact with my mother-in-law. "I am talking about the specific legal maneuvering that happened exactly 10 years ago. Did you genuinely believe I would not run a comprehensive deep dive background check on the woman who was actively trying to siphon my salary into the Las Vegas slot machines? Did you think I would just ignore the glaring gaping holes in your financial history?" Jada is an incredibly thorough lawyer. She spent her entire lunch hour today pulling heavily sealed court documents from the county archives. We know absolutely everything about the life insurance payout. The room grew incredibly silent, save for the sound of my own steady breathing. "Clara fell ill, did she not?" I asked, my words echoing like gunshots in the tense atmosphere of the living room. "She had a severe mental breakdown after her husband unexpectedly passed away. She was vulnerable, heavily medicated, and completely isolated from the rest of the world. And you, being the loving, devoted sister, stepped right in to take control of her care. You brought in a shady doctor. You manufactured an emergency psychiatric evaluation. You secured a comprehensive power of attorney and a full medical conservatorship. And the very second you gained legal access to her estate, you liquidated her $300,000 life insurance policy, dumped her in a state-run nursing facility, and lost every single penny of her money at the high-stakes roulette tables in Reno." Barbara let out a raw, guttural scream. The polished mask of the sophisticated suburban matriarch was ripped away entirely, exposing the feral, desperate addict hiding underneath. "You shut your mouth right now," she shrieked, her voice cracking with violent, unhinged rage. She lunged forward across the coffee table, her hands curled into rigid claws aiming directly for my face. She wanted to slap the truth right out of my mouth. She wanted to physically silence the accusations that were destroying her entire world. But before her manicured nails could make contact with my cheek, Trent intercepted her. He grabbed his mother by the shoulders and forcefully shoved her backward. Barbara stumbled awkwardly, her heels catching on the edge of the woven area rug, and crashed hard into the adjacent armchair. Mom, stop it! Trent yelled, his voice laced with genuine, overwhelming panic. Are you completely crazy? You cannot hit her. We desperately need her signature tonight, and if you leave physical marks on her face, the county judge will throw out the entire petition tomorrow morning. You will ruin the entire plan. But Barbara was entirely beyond reasoning. She struggled aggressively against Trent's grip, her face contorted with pure, unadulterated hatred. She knows too much, Barbara spat, pointing a shaking, glowing finger at me. She is trying to destroy my life. She is making all of this up to ruin me. Trent froze completely. He turned his head slowly, looking down at his mother with a sudden horrifying realization dawning in his eyes. He had always believed Barbara's sanitized narrative that Aunt Clara had simply run out of retirement funds and needed state-subsidized care. He had fully believed his mother was the tragic victim of unfortunate family circumstances. Now the heavy seeds of doubt were taking violent root in his mind. Wait a minute, Trent said, his voice dropping into a tense, dangerous whisper. Is she telling the truth, Mom? Did you actually forge Clara's medical evaluation 10 years ago? Did you steal her life insurance money and gamble it away? Did you use this exact same legal trick on your own sister? The division in their ranks was immediate and spectacular to witness. The impenetrable alliance of mother and son cracked wide open under the crushing weight of the truth. Dr. Thorne, who had been standing silently near the dining table, suddenly realized the massive federal implications of my words. If Barbara had a documented, proven history of establishing fraudulent conservatorships for financial gain, his involvement tonight was no longer just a simple, unethical cash grab. It was a verifiable, premeditated federal criminal conspiracy. The fake psychiatrist began shoving his medical equipment frantically back into his leather bag, his hands shaking violently. I am leaving right now, Dr. Thorne announced, his voice trembling with sheer cowardice. I was explicitly told this was a standard, uncontested marital dispute over assets. I am absolutely not getting involved in a federal investigation over past family embezzlement. You people are entirely on your own. You are not going anywhere, Aris Trent commanded, abandoning his mother to step aggressively toward the doctor. You already signed the medical affidavit. If you walk out that front door now, you do not get a single dime to pay off your casino debts. The criminal enterprise was crumbling spectacularly right in front of my eyes. Trent was actively turning on the doctor. Barbara was turning on Trent for daring to question her fabricated history. I remained perfectly still on the sofa, watching the entire toxic operation devour itself from the inside out. I had not even played my final, most devastating card yet, and they were already tearing each other to shreds. The psychological warfare had completely broken them, leaving them exposed and incredibly vulnerable for the final blow. The chaotic division within their criminal ranks vanished the exact moment sheer desperation took over. Trent realized that psychological warfare was completely failing. My calculated revelation about his mother's dark financial history had successfully derailed their coordinated attack, but it also backed a greedy, desperate man into an incredibly dangerous corner. Trent abandoned the facade of the caring, deeply concerned husband. He dropped the theatrical pretense entirely. His face hardened into a mask of pure, ugly aggression, and the physical distance between us closed in the blink of an eye. He lunged across the short space separating the armchair from the leather sofa. Before I could shift my weight backward, Trent grabbed my right wrist with a brutal, unforgiving grip. His fingers dug deeply into my skin, the pressure harsh enough to immediately cut off the circulation to my hand. He leaned his entire body weight over me, pinning me effectively against the soft cushions of the couch. The stale metallic smell of the basement soot clinging to his shirt filled my lungs, mixed with the sharp scent of his nervous sweat. He snatched the heavy premium ballpoint pen from the glass coffee table with his free hand. With a violent, jerking motion, he slammed the cold metal casing directly into my palm, forcing my fingers to curl tightly around the barrel. "Listen to me very carefully," Sidney Trent growled, his voice dropping into a low, menacing register that vibrated with raw hostility. "The game's end right now. The forged mortgage loan has already been fully dispersed into my secondary accounts. Your heavy steel safe down in the basement is completely empty. The trust documents are gone. Everything is perfectly arranged. We hold every single winning card in this house." He pressed his face closer to mine, his eyes burning with a toxic, entitled rage. I could feel the heat of his harsh breath against my cheek. "You are going to apply that pen to the signature line of this power of attorney document. You are going to sign away your legal rights so I can fix the massive financial mess my mother created. Sign the document right now. Do not force me to use physical violence against you." The threat hung heavily in the stifling air of the living room. It was not an empty theatrical warning. The aggressive tension radiating from his clenched jaw and the painful crushing grip on my wrist confirmed he was fully prepared to cross the line from financial extortion into severe physical assault. Behind him, Barbara stepped forward, her greed entirely overpowering the momentary shock of my previous accusations. The prospect of finally accessing my $8 million inheritance erased any remaining hesitation she possessed. "Make her sign it. Trent," Barbara commanded, her voice shrill and urgent. "Break her fingers if you have to. We do not have time to argue with a woman who has officially been declared legally insane. Dr. Thorne has already provided the medical cover we need. If she gets bruised during a severe psychotic episode, no judge will ever question it." The situation had officially reached its absolute boiling point. To any outside observer, the scene would look entirely hopeless. I was a physically overpowered woman trapped inside a locked suburban fortress. I was entirely surrounded by a hostile, physically aggressive man, a malicious, gambling-addicted mother-in-law, and a corrupt medical professional who was guarding the hallway exit. There was no visible path of escape. There was no physical way I could overpower my husband to reach the heavy deadbolt on the front door. The walls were rapidly closing in, and Trent truly believed he had finally broken my spirit through sheer terrifying force. He tightened his grip on my wrist, forcing my hand downward until the tip of the ballpoint pen hovered a mere fraction of an inch above the crisp white paper of the legal release form. "Just sign your name, Sidney," Trent demanded, his voice thick with arrogant impatience. I did not struggle against his crushing physical hold. A forensic accountant does not waste energy engaging in a physical brawl when the ultimate victory relies entirely on mathematics and precise timing. I kept my right hand perfectly rigid, refusing to let the ink touch the paper, while my mind operated with the cold, calculating efficiency of a digital stopwatch. I slowly turned my head away from the fraudulent document. I ignored the furious, aggressive demands spilling from my husband's mouth. Instead, I deliberately shifted my calm, unblinking gaze downward to the sleek silver chronograph watch secured tightly around my left wrist. The polished silver hands moved across the dark, sophisticated dial with flawless mechanical rhythm. I watched the slender second hand sweep past the number 6, continuing its relentless upward climb. I was not looking for an escape route. I was verifying a strictly synchronized operational timeline. Jada had initiated the comprehensive federal tip to the United States Attorney Office exactly when Trent had locked the front door. We had mapped out the geographical distance between the federal field office and my suburban estate with extreme precision. We factored in the high-priority nature of the active wire fraud report, the specific mention of an ongoing hostage situation involving a heavily forged medical conservatorship, and the current evening traffic patterns. The tactical response time was mathematically undeniable. "What are you looking at?" Trent shouted, his frustration boiling over into blind rage. He gave my trapped arm a violent shake. "Look at the paper. Sign the document." I kept my eyes locked entirely on the sweeping hand of my silver watch. I did not blink. I did not show a single ounce of the terror he so desperately wanted to consume me. 10 seconds, I stated, my voice cutting through the chaotic, aggressive noise of the living room like a perfectly sharpened blade. Trent froze, his face twisting into an expression of profound, irritated confusion. "What the hell are you talking about? What happens in 10 seconds? 9. I continued, my tone echoing with a chilling, hollow certainty. 8. 7. Barbara took a nervous step backward, her hands fluttering anxiously near her collarbone. Trent, what is she doing? Why is she counting down? Make her stop talking and sign the papers. 6, I said slowly, turning my head to lock my cold, predatory gaze directly onto my husband's confused, soot-stained face. 5, 4. Stop it right now! Trent roared, raising his free hand as if he were preparing to strike me across the face to break my focused concentration. I am not playing these twisted psychological games with you anymore, Sydney. 3. I whispered, a dark, victorious smile finally breaking across my face. 2, 1. I did not need to say 0. The explosive, undeniable reality of the outside world crashed into our locked suburban fortress, shattering the arrogant illusion of their criminal victory into absolute, irreparable pieces. You are absolutely right, Trent, I stated. My voice was completely devoid of the fabricated terror I had been projecting all evening. Everything is perfectly settled. With a sudden violent surge of adrenaline, I twisted my wrist sharply against his thumb joint. The sudden leverage broke his crushing grip instantly. I shoved his arm away with enough force to send him stumbling backward into the heavy glass coffee table. The premium ballpoint pen clattered uselessly to the floor. Before Trent could recover his balance or utter a single word of retaliation, the deafening shriek of multiple high-decibel sirens shattered the quiet suburban night. The sound did not build gradually from a distance. It erupted directly at the end of our long driveway. Tires screeched violently against the wet asphalt. Heavy vehicle doors slammed shut in rapid succession. Instantly, the dimly lit living room was violently illuminated. Blinding flashes of strobe red and intense neon blue light pierced through the sheer fabric of the front window curtains. The rhythmic strobing colors painted Trent's terrified face in alternating shades of crimson and sapphire. The aggressive light show bounced off the vaulted ceiling and illuminated the scattered fraudulent legal documents resting on the table. Trent froze. His mouth hung open in a silent gasp of pure shock. He looked frantically toward the front window, then back at me. His arrogant demeanor was completely vaporized. Barbara let out a high-pitched, genuine scream of terror. She scrambled backward, pressing her back flush against the dining room wall. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with sudden, inescapable panic. She looked exactly like a trapped animal, finally realizing the walls of the steel cage had just slammed shut. Dr. Thorne did not even try to maintain his professional facade. The disgraced psychiatrist grabbed his leather medical bag and bolted toward the rear kitchen exit. He was acting on pure survival instinct, desperate to escape the massive legal fallout he knew was waiting right outside. But he did not even make it past the kitchen island. "Federal agents, open the door." The command boomed through a heavy metal bullhorn, rattling the glass panes of the front windows. It was followed immediately by 3 thunderous, bone-shaking strikes against the solid oak of our front door. The physical force behind the pounding indicated they were not requesting entry. They were demanding it, and they were fully prepared to use a heavy steel battering ram if Trent delayed by a single second. Trent stood paralyzed in the center of the living room. His chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. He looked at the locked front door, then down at the forged power of attorney documents, and finally at me. The horrifying realization of what my countdown actually meant was actively short-circuiting his brain. He had thought I was suffering a psychotic break. He now understood I had been coordinating a massive tactical federal strike. "FBI, we have a warrant. Open the door now." The second warning was louder, sharper, and completely devoid of patience. Trent did not move. He was entirely immobilized by shock. So I took control of the situation. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored charcoal blazer, stepped gracefully over the shattered porcelain plate on the floor, and walked straight toward the entryway. I reached out, unlocked the security chain, and flipped the heavy metal deadbolt. I pulled the ruined oak door wide open. The cold rain-washed Seattle air rushed into the stifling foyer, bringing with it a swarm of highly armed federal personnel. 6 agents wearing dark tactical gear and prominent yellow FBI block lettering across their heavy ballistic vests flooded into the house. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision, immediately fanning out to secure every single exit. 2 local Seattle police officers followed closely behind them, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. One aggressive agent marched directly past me and intercepted Dr. Thorne just as the fake psychiatrist tried to scramble out the back patio door. The agent shoved Thorne firmly against the sliding glass, confiscating his leather bag before patting him down for concealed weapons. Barbara shrieked again, sliding down the dining room wall until she hit the floor. She curled her knees to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Her glowing glitter-covered silk nightgown made her look entirely ridiculous under the harsh tactical flashlights the agents were sweeping across the dark room. Trent backed up until the back of his knees hit the leather sofa. He raised his hands high in the air, his eyes darting frantically between the tactical vests and the shiny silver badges. Wait, there is a massive misunderstanding here," Trent stammered. His voice cracked with pure, pathetic desperation. "We are just having a private family medical intervention. My wife is severely ill. She needs psychiatric help. You have the wrong house. We are innocent people. You are exactly the person we are looking for, Trent." The voice did not belong to a federal agent. It belonged to a woman who possessed more legal authority and sheer intellectual power than anyone else in the room. Jada walked confidently through the open front door. She bypassed the armed federal agents with the smooth, untouchable grace of a corporate defense attorney who had just orchestrated the perfect legal takedown. She wore a sharp-tailored navy suit, her designer heels clicking authoritatively against the hardwood floor. She held a thick, sealed legal dossier tucked securely under her arm. Trent stared at his sister-in-law, his jaw practically hitting the floor. His brain simply could not process her presence alongside federal law enforcement. "Jada," he gasped, his voice trembling wildly. "What are you doing here? Why are you with the FBI? Tell them they are making a mistake. Tell them Sydney has completely lost her mind. We just want to get her into a hospital." Jada stopped right next to me. She looked at Trent, then at the cowering figure of Barbara, and finally at the fraudulent legal papers scattered across the glass coffee table. A slow, chillingly victorious smile spread across her face. "I am not here to defend you, Trent," Jada stated, her voice echoing with absolute, uncompromising power. "I am here serving as the primary legal counsel for my client, Sydney. And as of 10 minutes ago, I personally handed the United States Attorney Office a comprehensive federal dossier detailing your massive coordinated financial crimes. You are entirely finished." Trent looked as if he had been struck by a high-voltage electrical current. The betrayal from his own brother's wife was the final crushing blow to his shattered reality. His legs finally gave out and he collapsed heavily onto the leather sofa. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with absolute suffocating horror. "You set us up," Trent whispered. His voice was entirely devoid of its former arrogance. "You orchestrated all of this from the very beginning. You let us believe we were winning." I looked down at the man who had tried to steal my wealth, drug me into submission, and permanently lock me in a psychiatric ward. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I felt the pure, unadulterated rush of absolute justice. "I told you earlier tonight, Trent," I replied. My voice rang clearly over the chaotic noise of the federal agents securing the perimeter of the living room. "I am a forensic accountant. I do not guess. I prove. And right now the federal government is here to collect my evidence." The lead federal agent, a tall, imposing man, wearing a heavy ballistic vest and possessing a deeply stern jawline, stepped past me and gave a sharp, authoritative nod to his tactical team. "Secure the room," he commanded. His voice was an absolute thunderclap of federal authority that left absolutely no room for negotiation. 2 heavily armed agents immediately flanked Dr. Thorne. They grabbed his arms with practiced, ruthless efficiency, twisting them expertly behind his back. The sharp mechanical ratcheting of heavy steel handcuffs echoed violently through the open dining room. Thorne began to hyperventilate instantly. He started begging for a plea deal, crying loudly that he was just a private medical consultant who had been aggressively manipulated by a desperate family. The federal agents ignored his pathetic, frantic whining, completely reciting his federal Miranda rights in a bored, monotonous tone that signaled his career and his freedom were permanently over. Trent was next. A broad-shouldered agent grabbed him firmly by the collar of his pristine button-down shirt and hauled him forcefully up from the leather sofa. Trent did not fight back. His legs appeared to be entirely made of jelly. He stumbled forward, stammering incoherently. He looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, begging me to call them off. He claimed he was my husband, that he loved me, that he only wanted to protect me. I crossed my arms tightly over my chest and stared at him with absolute, chilling, zero emotion. I turned my focused attention down to the floor. Barbara was still huddled pathetically against the baseboards of the dining room wall. The bright, sweeping tactical flashlights from the law enforcement officers illuminated her perfectly. The harsh beams highlighted the neon blue ultraviolet tracking ink smeared wildly across her face, her neck, and the collar of her expensive silk nightgown. She looked completely deranged, resembling a brightly painted clown rather than a sophisticated suburban matriarch. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. My tailored heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. Barbara scrambled backward in sheer terror, scraping her back against the paint, her trembling hands raised defensively in front of her face. "You really thought you outsmarted me last night, Barbara," I stated smoothly, my voice carrying clearly and authoritatively across the chaotic, crowded room. "You thought you sneaked into my private bedroom like a masterful thief. You thought the sudden, loud explosion of that velvet box was the entirety of my retaliation. You genuinely believed I set a simple, childish prank just to ruin your expensive Parisian silk nightgown and embarrass you in front of your son." Barbara stared up at me, her chest heaving erratically. Her jaw trembled so violently, her teeth audibly chattered. She could not formulate a single word. A forensic accountant does not play practical jokes. I continued looking down at her with pure, icy calculation. We execute highly sophisticated sting operations. That glitter bomb was nothing more than theatrical misdirection. It was specifically designed to shock your central nervous system, induce immediate psychological panic, and force you to grab the contents of that box and run back to your bedroom without carefully inspecting what you had just stolen. I paused for a fraction of a second, letting the sheer crushing weight of my words settle heavily over her. She stopped crying completely. A look of profound, dawning horror began to creep into her wide eyes. "You thought the heavy metallic object inside that box was a physical master key to my basement safe," I explained, breaking down the exact mechanics of her own spectacular destruction. "But you quickly realized it had a USB connector hidden cleverly under the brass cap. You thought you had hit the absolute financial jackpot. You assumed I kept my banking routing numbers, my offshore passwords, and the digital deeds to my trust fund stored on a highly encrypted hardware wallet. So you rushed blindly to your laptop and you plugged it directly into your hard drive." Barbara let out a small, strangled gasp. Her shaking hands dropped limply to her lap. "The moment that USB connected to your computer port, it did not ask for a password," I revealed, keeping my tone perfectly clinical and utterly devastating. "It silently deployed a military-grade malicious payload. It was a highly aggressive self-executing keylogger combined with a comprehensive data mirroring script. While you were frantically clicking through your own desktop folders, trying to find my millions, my software was quietly, ruthlessly ripping through every single hidden file on your hard drive." Jada stepped up directly beside me. She handed a thick, heavily bound stack of printed papers to the lead FBI agent. Jada looked down at Barbara with an expression of supreme, victorious disgust. "The payload bypassed your basic amateur firewalls in less than 3 seconds," Jada added, crossing her arms with a sharp, satisfied smile. "It captured your real-time keystrokes. It bypassed your encrypted casino login portals. It downloaded the entire history of your deleted emails and your hidden financial ledgers." I nodded slowly, locking my gaze entirely onto Barbara's terrified, glowing face. The software packaged all of your dirty little secrets into a heavily encrypted data packet and transmitted it straight to my secure offline server, I stated. I spent the entire night reading through your digital trash. I read the emails where you explicitly negotiated Dr. Thorne's fraudulent payout. I saw the desperate, groveling messages you sent to the Nevada casino syndicate begging for more time and promising them my $8 million inheritance. I even found the digital templates you downloaded to practice forging my exact signature for Trent's disastrous mortgage application. Trent let out a loud, agonizing groan from the center of the room. He tried to twist his body away from the agent firmly holding him. I did not know she was sending emails, Trent yelled, attempting to throw his own mother directly under the federal bus. I did not know about the forged templates. She manipulated me, Sydney. She told me we were just borrowing the money temporarily to save her life. I did not even look at him. You forged the mortgage documents with your own hands, Trent, I replied coldly. You wired the stolen funds yourself. There is absolutely no legal immunity for stupid, greedy accomplices. I turned back to Barbara. She was hyperventilating again. You bypassed my computer security, Barbara whispered, her voice cracking under the crushing weight of her own sheer stupidity. You hacked my personal laptop. That is highly illegal. You cannot use any of that in a court of law. Jada laughed out loud. It was a sharp, brilliant sound of pure legal triumph that echoed through the foyer. Actually, Barbara, you voluntarily stole a piece of hardware from Sydney's private bedroom and willingly plugged it into a device connected to the shared residential network that Sydney legally pays for. Furthermore, you utilized that internet connection to actively commit federal wire fraud across state lines. The data collection was entirely legal under the fraud prevention clauses of her corporate accounting licenses. The United States Attorney Office has already reviewed the digital chain of custody. The evidence is entirely admissible and utterly damning. I leaned down slightly, bringing my face much closer to Barbara's. The neon tracking ink smeared across her cheeks looked intensely pathetic in the harsh tactical lighting. Wire fraud is an incredibly serious federal offense, Barbara. I explained, delivering the final fatal blow to her entire existence. It carries a maximum statutory penalty of 20 years in a federal penitentiary per count. And my automated software clocked exactly 47 separate, highly fraudulent wire transfers originating from your IP address directly to those Las Vegas holding accounts. Barbara's eyes rolled completely to the back of her head. The sheer mathematical reality of a potential 900-year prison sentence completely short-circuited her fragile brain. She slumped sideways against the dining room baseboard, entirely paralyzed by the absolute, inescapable magnitude of her own catastrophic failure. The heavy thud of Barbara collapsing against the baseboard sent a visible shockwave straight through Trent. He stared down at his mother, watching her completely dissociate from reality under the blinding beams of the tactical flashlights. The grand orchestrated illusion of their untouchable suburban superiority had just been violently dismantled. Trent realized in that exact moment that the wire fraud charges were absolutely inescapable. His mother was going to federal prison, and he was standing right next to her in the blast zone. But Trent possessed the distinct, incredibly dangerous arrogance of a man who had never been held accountable for a single failure in his entire life. Instead of surrendering to the overwhelming presence of federal law enforcement, his mind frantically scrambled for a lifeline. He needed a weapon. He needed leverage. He needed to prove that even if he was going down in flames, he was dragging me straight into the inferno with him. A sudden manic energy seized his entire body. He stopped trembling and abruptly shoved his shoulders backward, fighting aggressively against the iron grip of the federal agent holding his arms. The agent instantly tightened his hold, preparing to force Trent to the floor, but Trent ignored the pain completely. He snapped his head up, locking his wild, bloodshot eyes directly onto mine. His face twisted into a grotesque, triumphant sneer that looked entirely deranged under the flashing red and blue emergency lights pouring through the front windows. "You think you are untouchable, Sydney," Trent roared, his voice cracking wildly as it echoed off the vaulted ceilings of the living room. "You think these federal agents and your slick corporate lawyer changed the fundamental reality of what happened today. You can lock us up for the bank transfers. You can send my mother to a penitentiary. But you have absolutely nothing left. I maintained my perfectly neutral stance, crossing my arms and watching his desperate, pathetic outburst with clinical fascination. I did not offer a single word to interrupt him. A golden rule of forensic investigation is to always allow a panicking suspect to fill the silence. They will inevitably hand you the exact weapon required to execute their final destruction. You do not have the original trust documents. Trent screamed a hysterical, breathless laugh ripping from his throat. His chest heaved violently as he strained against the agent. You do not have the wet ink signatures. You do not have the notarized certificates from your precious uncle. You can never claim that $8 million inheritance now. I know you need those physical papers to authorize the bank transfer, and you will never, ever get them. The lead FBI agent standing near the entryway raised a questioning eyebrow, his hand resting casually on his tactical belt. He was actively listening to a suspect voluntarily incriminate himself, allowing the admission to flow freely into the official federal record. I took the blowtorch to that massive steel vault in the basement, Trent confessed loudly, throwing his head back in sheer arrogant defiance. I cut straight through those reinforced hinges. I pulled out every single manila envelope, every single legal binder, and every single financial certificate you locked inside that dark hole. And I burned them. I burned your entire $8 million future into a pile of worthless gray ash. You can send me to a cell, Sydney, but you will be rotting in poverty right alongside me. You have absolutely zero proof that money belongs to you. His voice reached a fever pitch of pure, venomous victory. He truly believed he had executed the ultimate devastating checkmate. He thought he had successfully neutralized my entire financial existence. He stood there panting heavily, waiting for my calm facade to finally shatter into a million pieces. He waited for me to fall to my knees and scream in agonizing defeat. I simply tilted my head slightly to the side and let out a soft, amused sigh. Jada stepped smoothly in front of me, perfectly intercepting Trent's manic line of sight. She adjusted the cuffs of her pristine navy suit and looked at my treacherous husband with an expression of supreme, unadulterated pity. It was the exact look a brilliant predator gives to an incredibly slow, remarkably stupid prey. Trent, you truly are the most spectacular disappointment this family has ever produced, Jada stated. Her voice was calm, incredibly articulate, and resonated with absolute legal authority. She gracefully lifted the heavy sealed leather portfolio she had been carrying under her arm. She set it down firmly onto the edge of the glass coffee table right next to the fraudulent medical documents Dr. Thorne had abandoned. With precise, deliberate movements, Jada unzipped the top compartment. She reached inside and pulled out a thick, pristine stack of heavy, watermarked legal parchment. The bright, unmistakable crimson wax seal of a certified state notary gleamed perfectly under the harsh, tactical lighting of the room. Trent stopped laughing instantly. The manic energy drained out of his body as if someone had pulled a physical plug. He stared at the thick stack of papers in Jada's manicured hands, his eyes widening in profound, paralyzing confusion. Too bad, Trent, Jada announced, her tone dripping with cold surgical precision. That massive 200-kilogram safe bolted to the concrete floor in the basement was nothing more than a highly expensive, extremely heavy decoy. It was a complete diversion tactic. Sydney specifically purchased that vault to serve as a designated trap for greedy, impatient parasites exactly like you and your mother. Trent opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His brain was violently rejecting the reality unfolding right in front of his face. The only thing you burned to ashes today was a massive pile of worthless scrap paper, blank legal pads, and photocopied takeout menus. Jada continued, relentlessly twisting the metaphorical knife deep into his shattered ego. The genuine original trust documents, verifying Sydney as the sole uncontested beneficiary of the $8 million estate, have never been inside this suburban house. Those authentic documents have been sitting securely inside a highly monitored, climate-controlled safety deposit box at the downtown branch of Chase Bank for the past 3 entire years. I stepped up to stand shoulder to shoulder with Jada, looking directly into Trent's horrified eyes. Did you honestly believe a veteran forensic accountant would keep her most critical, irreplaceable financial documents sitting in a residential basement while living with a man who was secretly siphoning cash to a gambling addict? I asked coldly. I built a career securing assets against highly sophisticated corporate syndicates. You are a weak man who cannot even execute a fake burglary without leaving the broken glass on the wrong side of the front door. Jida tapped the authentic red-sealed trust document against the glass table, drawing the attention of every single federal agent in the room. Furthermore, Jada added, raising her voice to ensure her legal assessment was permanently logged by the authorities present. You just stood in a room completely filled with federal law enforcement officers and voluntarily shouted a full, uncoerced confession. You just admitted to felony destruction of private property. You admitted to staging a breaking and entering of a domestic residence. And you proudly confessed to attempting to intentionally defraud a legally established financial trust. The silence that followed her declaration was absolutely deafening. The sheer monumental weight of his own stupidity finally crashed down onto Trent's shoulders. He had just handed the United States government a perfectly wrapped, verbally verified confession to multiple severe felonies. He had completely incriminated himself in a desperate, pathetic attempt to hurt me, and he had accomplished absolutely nothing except guaranteeing his own maximum prison sentence. The federal agent holding Trent tightened his grip significantly, jerking my husband roughly backward. Trent's knees buckled completely. The last remaining shred of his arrogant defiance evaporated into thin air. He sagged heavily against the agent, his head dropping forward as a harsh, ugly sob ripped its way out of his throat. He was not crying because he was sorry for betraying me. He was crying because he had finally realized that he was totally, inescapably trapped in a nightmare entirely of his own making. He had gambled his marriage, his freedom, and his entire future on a reckless, greedy scheme to steal my wealth. And in the end, the only thing he had successfully managed to destroy was himself. I watched the tears stream down his soot-stained face, feeling absolutely nothing but the pure, exhilarating rush of total victory. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had crushed them completely. The lead federal agent did not waste another single second. He stepped directly over the scattered, useless legal documents on the glass coffee table and grabbed Trent roughly by the back of his collar. He hauled my treacherous husband up from the leather sofa with zero gentleness. Trent was completely limp, offering absolutely no physical resistance as the agent slammed him face first against the drywall. "Trenton, you are officially under federal arrest." The agent barked, his voice carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of the United States Department of Justice. The sharp mechanical sound of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Trent's wrists echoed through the living room. "You are being charged with severe counts of federal mortgage fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you start using it right now." Trent let out a pathetic, high-pitched wail. It was the sound of a fundamentally weak man realizing that his pristine suburban life was permanently over. He did not look like a confident executive anymore. He looked like a shattered, soot-stained criminal. The agent patted him down roughly, ignoring the tears streaming down his face. Across the room, the reality of the situation finally pierced through Barbara's state of profound shock. As two female federal agents approached her with their handcuffs already drawn, her survival instincts violently kicked in. She scrambled up from the baseboards, pressing her back against the dining room wall, and began swinging her arms wildly. "Get your hands off me!" Barbara shrieked, her voice reaching a deafening, hysterical pitch. "Do you know who I am? I am a highly respected member of this community. I am a wealthy widow. You cannot treat me like a common street thug. She is the crazy one. She set a chemical bomb in my house." The agents did not even blink. They grabbed her flailing arms, twisted them expertly behind her back, and slammed her face down onto the polished dining table. Her cheek hit the hard wood with a loud smack. The violent motion sent a fresh cloud of invisible ultraviolet glitter into the air. Under the tactical flashlights, she looked completely deranged, a neon blue monster finally caught in the light. Barbara, you are under arrest for 47 counts of federal wire fraud, felony extortion, and conspiracy to defraud a private estate, the female agent recited coldly, locking the steel cuffs tightly over Barbara's wrists. The evidence against you is absolute. Your casino bookies are already being raided in Nevada as we speak. Barbara let out a raw, animalistic howl. It was a scream of pure, unfiltered agony. She was not mourning the loss of her family. She was mourning the loss of her gambling money and her fake high society reputation. She thrashed against the agents, kicking her legs wildly, but they held her down with effortless professional force. Dr. Thorne watched the violent takedown of his co-conspirators with wide, terrified eyes. The agent guarding him pushed him firmly toward the front door. Thorne frantically dug his heels into the hardwood floor, turning his desperate gaze toward Jada. "Please, you have to tell them I was manipulated." Thorne begged, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "I am a licensed medical professional. I have a private practice. If they arrest me for this, the medical board will strip my license. I will lose my entire career over one simple misunderstanding." Jada stepped right up to his face, her expression carved from solid ice. She looked him up and down with absolute withering disgust. "You do not have a career anymore," Aris Jada stated, her voice dropping into a lethal quiet register. "I personally forwarded your forged medical affidavit to the state medical board exactly 20 minutes ago. They have already initiated an emergency suspension of your license pending your federal indictment. You are going to federal prison for conspiracy to commit medical fraud, and you will never legally prescribe so much as an aspirin for the rest of your pathetic life." The blood drained completely from Thorne's face. His knees buckled and the federal agent had to physically drag his dead weight toward the entryway. "Move them out," the lead agent commanded. The tactical team began marching the three criminals toward the shattered front door. I followed closely behind them, stepping out onto the covered front porch. The cold Seattle rain had slowed to a light drizzle, but the atmosphere outside was absolutely electric. The flashing red and blue lights of the 5 police cruisers and black federal SUVs parked in my driveway had illuminated the entire street. Our exclusive, highly manicured suburban neighborhood was usually dead silent at this hour, but tonight it was the front row of a spectacular public execution. Every single one of our wealthy, image-obsessed neighbors was standing out on their manicured lawns. People in expensive silk robes and heavy winter coats were huddled under umbrellas, their eyes wide with absolute, unapologetic shock. These were the exact same high society people Barbara had spent years trying to impress. These were the country club members she had lied to, the bridge club partners she had bragged to, and the neighbors she had constantly judged. Now they were all watching her get dragged out of my house in handcuffs. The agents shoved Trent down the front steps. He kept his chin tucked firmly against his chest, trying desperately to hide his face from the judging eyes of the neighborhood. But there was no hiding the steel chains binding his wrists. The man who had arrogantly threatened to leave me penniless was now being shoved roughly into the back of an armored federal vehicle. Barbara did not go quietly. She fought the agents every single step of the way, kicking and screaming obscenities into the damp night air. The tactical flashlights swept across her struggling form, illuminating the massive streaks of neon blue tracking ink plastered all over her face and her ruined silk nightgown. She looked entirely psychotic. The neighbors gasped, several of them pulling out their smartphones to record the unbelievable spectacle. Barbara's entire social empire was disintegrating right in front of her eyes. She screamed at the neighbors, demanding they help her, but they only backed away in collective horror. Her reputation, her dignity, and her carefully constructed facade of wealth were being permanently pulverized on the wet asphalt of my driveway. She was shoved forcefully into the back of a police cruiser, the heavy door slamming shut behind her, cutting off her hysterical shrieks. I stood tall on the top step of my porch, my arms crossed elegantly over my tailored blazer. I watched the taillights of the federal convoy illuminate the rainy street as they pulled away, taking the toxic parasites completely out of my life forever. The neighborhood remained perfectly silent, staring at me in sheer awe. I did not offer them an explanation. I did not wave. I simply turned around, walked back into my beautiful, fully secured home, and closed the solid oak door. The house was finally mine. The money was finally safe. And the absolute crushing weight of their betrayal had been replaced by the intoxicating, unmatched thrill of total victory. 6 months later, the crisp autumn wind whipped across the expansive private rooftop terrace of my brand new downtown Seattle penthouse. The chaotic, suffocating memory of that suburban estate felt like an entirely different lifetime. I had listed that sprawling house on the market the very next morning after the federal raid, selling it for a massive cash profit to a tech executive who asked zero questions about the shattered front door. I used a fraction of my heavily protected $8 million trust fund to purchase this sleek, ultra-modern sanctuary in the sky. Standing near the edge of the reinforced glass balcony, I looked out over the glittering city skyline. The view was absolutely magnificent, but it paled in comparison to the breathtaking beauty of total, undeniable justice. The federal court proceedings had officially concluded earlier this week. The rapid, brutal efficiency of the United States justice system had completely crushed whatever lingering hopes my former in-laws harbored. Trent had walked into the federal courtroom looking like a hollow, terrified shell of the arrogant man I once married. His expensive designer suits had been replaced by a drab, oversized institutional jumpsuit. The crushing weight of the insurmountable digital evidence I had provided left his public defender with absolutely no strategic options. Trent was forced to accept a comprehensive plea deal to avoid spending decades behind bars. The federal judge, a stern man with zero tolerance for domestic financial predators, sentenced my treacherous ex-husband to a mandatory 7 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Trent wept openly when the heavy wooden gavel struck the sounding block. He turned his head toward the gallery, searching desperately for a single ounce of pity in my eyes. He found absolutely nothing but the cold, clinical satisfaction of a forensic accountant balancing a long overdue ledger. His sentence included full mandatory restitution, permanently stripping him of any future assets he might ever manage to acquire. Barbara received an equally devastating dose of absolute reality. Her highly publicized trial became a sensational media spectacle, thoroughly destroying every single shred of her manufactured high society reputation. The federal prosecutors meticulously laid out her extensive history of wire fraud, her aggressive casino syndicates, and her horrific predatory actions against her own vulnerable sister a decade ago. The judge showed zero mercy to the manipulative matriarch. Barbara was sentenced to 5 hard years in federal prison. Upon her eventual release, she is mandated to serve thousands of hours of community service directly inside a state-run gambling addiction rehabilitation facility. She lost her suburban castle, her wealthy friends, and her entire false identity. Dr. Eris Thorne fared no better. The disgraced, debt-ridden psychiatrist was formally stripped of his medical license permanently. He received a 4-year federal sentence for his direct, willing participation in the fabricated medical conservatorship conspiracy. The entire toxic syndicate had been completely eradicated from society, locked inside concrete cells where they could never financially or psychologically terrorize another innocent victim. The smooth, heavy slide of the glass terrace door opening pulled me from my highly satisfying reflections. I turned around, a genuine warm smile breaking across my face. Jada stepped out into the cool evening air. She looked absolutely breathtaking, wearing a sharply tailored emerald green blazer that perfectly complemented her radiant, confident energy. The heavy, oppressive weight of her toxic marriage had been completely lifted from her shoulders. Exactly 24 hours after the explosive federal raid at my old house, Jada had marched directly into her own living room and handed Connor a legally ironclad stack of divorce papers. Connor had proven himself to be exactly the weak, pathetic coward we always knew he was. He had cried, begged, and pathetically attempted to defend the horrific criminal actions of his mother and his brother. Jada did not waste a single second listening to his manufactured excuses. She completely eviscerated him in the divorce settlement, securing her complete financial independence and leaving him to deal with the radioactive fallout of his family's highly publicized disgrace. Jada walked across the rooftop terrace holding two elegant crystal flutes filled with vintage, perfectly chilled champagne. She handed one to me, her dark eyes sparkling with the unmatched thrill of absolute freedom and shared victory. The final corporate registration documents cleared the state board this morning. Jada announced, her voice ringing with powerful, undeniable pride. Our new enterprise is officially incorporated and legally protected. We tapped our crystal glasses together, the delicate chime ringing out clearly against the backdrop of the illuminated Seattle skyline. We had not just survived the vicious, calculated attacks of a greedy suburban crime family. We had utilized our combined professional expertise to forge an entirely new empire. Jada was no longer just a brilliant corporate defense attorney, and I was no longer just a solitary forensic accountant. We had officially merged our respective talents to launch an elite boutique financial investigation and corporate defense firm. We catered exclusively to high-net-worth individuals, utilizing aggressive legal strategies and ruthless financial audits to protect vulnerable clients from predatory family members and sophisticated domestic embezzlers. Jada was officially my premier legal partner. We were a heavily armed, legally untouchable alliance. We already have 3 massive corporate clients secured for the upcoming quarter, I noted, taking a slow, appreciative sip of the crisp champagne. And not a single one of them will ever have to worry about a greedy relative siphoning their hard-earned wealth. We built the exact fortress we needed. Jada leaned gracefully against the glass railing, looking out over the sprawling, glowing city. She took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. We completely ripped the diseased roots out of the ground, Sydney. We did not just survive them, we made sure they can never grow back. I stepped up right beside her, feeling the cold, refreshing wind sweep through my hair. I thought about the terrified, desperate woman Trent and Barbara had foolishly assumed I was. I thought about the explosive glitter bomb, the invisible tracking ink, and the meticulous, undeniable paper trail that had systematically dismantled their entire miserable existence. I had completely rewritten the rules of their toxic game, and I had emerged as the absolute undisputed victor. I raised my crystal champagne flute high into the night air, angling it toward the bright, shining city lights. The golden liquid bubbled and caught the reflection of the towering skyscrapers. I looked at Jada, the only true family I had ever actively chosen to keep. People always claim that family is supposed to be your ultimate safe haven, I stated, my voice echoing with pure, unwavering authority and absolute power. But sometimes the absolute best way to protect your family is to send the ones who do not deserve the title straight to prison. Cheers to freedom. Jada raised her glass, her sharp, victorious smile matching my own perfectly. We clinked our flutes together one final time, the sound ringing out like a definitive, triumphant bell. We turned our faces toward the endless, glowing horizon, stepping boldly and fearlessly into a brilliant, untouchable future we had brutally fought for and entirely earned. The most profound lesson to take away from this intense journey is that true security is never guaranteed simply by a marriage certificate or a familial title. We are often conditioned by society to blindly trust the people living under our own roof, to excuse their toxic behaviors, and to dismiss our own gut instincts in the name of keeping the peace. But ignoring the red flags only gives predators the darkness they need to operate. Toxic people will eagerly weaponize your empathy, your patience, and your wealth to serve their own desperate agendas. The ultimate defense against manipulation is not matching their emotional chaos, but stepping back and utilizing absolute calculating logic. When confronted with profound betrayal, our first instinct is usually to scream, to cry, and to demand explanations that will never truly come. This story teaches us that an emotional reaction is exactly what manipulators rely on to twist the narrative and paint you as the unstable one. Instead of giving them the hysterical reaction they crave, you must gather your evidence, build your impenetrable fortress in absolute silence, and strike only when your victory is legally undeniable. Finally, We learn that family is an earned privilege, not an automatic right. You have zero obligation to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic relatives warm. Choosing to completely cut out the people who actively plot your destruction is not an act of cruelty. It is the purest form of self-preservation. You have the absolute right to build a chosen family with people who respect your boundaries, celebrate your success, and stand shoulder to shoulder with you when the battles begin. Have you ever had to use cold, hard facts to expose a toxic person in your life? Share your experience in the comments below, and do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering stories of absolute justice.